Chapter 1992 Disciple by Ruanqing. You wish to enter the ethereal hall? Bai Ruanqing did not think that her senior uncle would be so anxious regarding this matter. She pondered for a moment before nodding. All right then, in any case, they had 3 days to finish their mission, so there should not be any trouble. Besides, they were out there to explore the region. Given their wealth, it was inconsequential whether they accomplished the mission or not. Bai Ruanqing quickly took out a map and scanned it carefully before directing her aerial beast accordingly. Roughly 30 minutes later, they arrived before a towering building. It was the Wuhai branch of the Ethereal Hall. The local currency in Wuhai City is similar to the ethereal coin used back in Zhenjiang City, just that its value is greater. As the value of the local currency has been pegged to our sect's sword pavilion coin in a 1-to-1 ratio, it's possible to purchase resources here using sword pavilion coins, Bai Ruanqing explained with a smile. Hearing that, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He was still worrying that he would have to find some way to earn some money in order to purchase an ethereal token, but it seemed like his worries were unfounded. He had plenty of sword pavilion coins with him, so purchasing an ethereal token should not be too much of a problem for him. The two of them quickly headed over to the front receptionist. The price of the ethereal token differs according to its tier. It's 20 ethereal coins for Ancient Sage 4 Dan, 200 ethereal coins for the lesser pseudo-immortal realm, and 2,000 ethereal coins for the true immortal realm, the receptionist explained. The prices were slightly cheaper than that of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. We'll buy 2 lesser pseudo-immortal realm ethereal tokens, Zhongxian said as he transferred 400 sword pavilion coins over through his ethereal card. Receiving the money, the receptionist quickly passed 2 jade tokens over and said, "Do you two need a room, too? There are silent chambers over there. They cost an ethereal coin every 2 hours. Zhongxian requested a single room. After making payment, he quickly headed over into the room with Bai Ruanqing. Already familiar with how the ethereal token worked, it did not take long before they entered the ethereal hall. The layout of the ethereal hall was similar to the branch in reality, which left one feeling slightly taken aback. Shaking off that bizarre feeling, Zhongxian proceeded to the front receptionist and revealed the token that he had obtained from Kongsha. "Can you show me what I can purchase with this?" The receptionist took the token, and a moment later, her eyes widened in shock. "Esteemed guest, this way please. I'm afraid that the value of your token is too great, so I have to invite my superior over to serve you personally." Zhongxian and Bai Ruanqing were swiftly led to a spacious room, and a moment later, an elder rushed in with an anxious look on his face. "I am an elder of Wuhai City's Ethereal Hall. I have seen your token, and it's definitely an insignia bestowed personally by our hall master. It entitles you to the right to purchase any cultivation resources required for you to advance your cultivation without incurring any costs." The elder bowed deeply as he presented the token back to Zhongxian. This token could be said to be a physical representation of their hall master himself, so they had to show the utmost respect to the person who carried it. As such, the elder dared not display the slightest discourtesy to the person before him despite his young age. "UN." Seeing that the token was indeed real, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. With a smile, he said, "Since that's the case, I would like you to bring me 100 superior immortal pills." After reaching the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm, he realized that standard immortal pills were no longer effective in advancing his cultivation anymore. If he wanted to further his cultivation, he would need to acquire superior immortal pills at the very least. At the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, each superior immortal pill was valued at a whopping 20,000 sword pavilion coins. Despite the huge wealth that he had accrued thus far, it would dry out swiftly if he spent his money on it. 100 superior immortal pills? The eyebrows of the elder shot up. Superior immortal pills are invaluable cultivation resources that are sought after by even high immortals. I fear that our Wuhai City Ethereal Hall doesn't have the means to bring out so many of them. How many of them do you have then? Zhongxian asked. I'd say, roughly 20 of them. The elder paused for a moment before continuing. If you aren't in any hurry, we should be able to gather the required amount within 3 days. All right then. Bring me the 21st and begin preparing the rest, Zhongxian instructed. He knew that using this token would not be exactly free. Even though he shared the same origin as Kongsha, he was not so naive as to think that the latter would express such generosity to him without expecting anything in return. Most likely, he would have to repay this favor somehow in the future. However, what was more important for him at the moment was to advance his cultivation. After speaking to Han Zhenqiu, he knew that he was in a precarious position, so he had to strengthen himself and secure his position in the Forsaken Continent as soon as possible. Yes, I understand, the elder replied before quickly left the area. Some time later, he returned with a storage ring in hand. He passed the storage ring over to Zhongxian, and with a deep bow, he asked once more, "Esteemed guest, may I know if there's anything else you require? I would like to browse through the true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals. May I know if this token will allow me to purchase them?" Zhongxian asked. This token can only be used to purchase consumables that would aid in the advancement of your cultivation. I fear that it's impossible for you to purchase books with it. At this point, the elder suddenly thought of something, so he quickly added, "Furthermore, the consumables you have purchased cannot be resold. If you are found to have broken this rule, the privileges of your token will be permanently revoked." Hearing those words, Zhongxian shook his head bitterly. When he heard the elder using the term cultivation resources, he had already had a hunch that he would not be allowed to purchase cultivation technique manuals with the token. Nevertheless, he could not help but feel a little disappointed when hearing it directly. Other than cultivation technique manuals, there was nothing that Zhongxian really needed anymore, so he could only back out of the ethereal hall. Using the teleportation token on the ethereal token, he withdrew the superior immortal pills. The superior immortal pills were indeed overflowing with concentrated spiritual energy. One could feel tremendous energy pulsating from them, giving one a feeling of incredible richness. In comparison, standard immortal pills did seem to pale far in comparison. Here, Zhongxian casually tossed a superior immortal pill over to Bai Wanqing. "Thank you, senior uncle." Bai Wanqing's face reddened in agitation. She had only seen superior immortal pills in her grandfather's place, but due to their immense value, she had never used one before. Looking at it with a leaping heart, she opened her mouth and swallowed it whole. Gu. The pill melted in her body, releasing an incredible surge of spiritual energy. Her eyes narrowed in astonishment as her body trembled uncontrollably from the sheer energy. Sweat was raining down from her body. Noticing the anomalies in her condition, Zhongxian asked with a frown, "What's wrong?" "Senior uncle, the spiritual energy in the superior immortal pill is simply too concentrated. I can't handle it." Bai Wanqing cried out with a pale face. Even the spiritual energy within a single standard immortal pill would take her quite a while to assimilate, let alone that from a superior immortal pill. It was similar to attempting to stuff an entire car into the mouth of a baby. It would be a wonder if the latter did not explode. At this moment, she finally understood why her grandfather had never allowed her to use a superior immortal pill before. It was not because he could not bear the price but because it would be a huge waste of resources given her lesser true immortal realm cultivation, and if things went wrong, her life would be at risk. A cry of agony sounded from Bai Wanqing's lips. Due to the overwhelming energy gathered within her body, some traces of it were leaking out from her acupoints. Her face reddened as her body inflated like a balloon, seemingly ready to explode to any moment. Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. He has not expected to encounter such a situation. He had only given the superior immortal pill to Bai Wanqing in order to repay her for doing him this favor, and he had not thought that such a situation would occur. If Bai Wanqing really exploded from eating the superior immortal pill that he had given to her, how was he supposed to explain this to Elder Bai Yi in the future? "Hurry up, execute a battle technique," Zhongxian roared in command. Knowing how critical the situation was, Bai Wanqing immediately gritted her teeth and forced herself to display a sword art. With a quick glance, Zhongxian's consciousness immediately dived into the Library of Heaven's Path to view the book that was compiled on her. A frown swiftly formed on his forehead. It seems like the only way out of this is for her to swiftly cultivate the rampaging spiritual energy and convert it into zhenqi, Zhongxian thought. This way, She will be able to place it under her control and deposit it safely into her dantian. Given Bai Wanqing's current condition, it was too hard to release the energy from her body. The build-up was too great for Zhongxian to guarantee that he would be able to facilitate the flow of energy out of her body safely. The safest way was for her to assimilate the spiritual energy into her body. However, the current issue was that she was limited by her own cultivation technique. Ordinary cultivation techniques were like a straw. No matter how much one tried to suck water out of an ocean using a straw, it would not make much of a difference. So, what was most important was finding a sufficiently powerful cultivation technique for Bai Wanqing so that she could swiftly place the rampaging spiritual energy under her control. It seems like I'll have to take her in as my student. Zhongxian sighed helplessly. It was fine to him that Bai Wanqing had learned a couple of sword arts from him without acknowledging him as her master. It simply was not of much concern to him. However, the same could not be said about the Heaven's Path divine art. It was one of his greatest secrets, and he would not allow the slightest bit of negligence concerning it. As such, he had already made up his mind to only impart the simplified versions of the Heaven's Path divine art to his direct disciples. While Bai Wanqing was reckless at times, he could tell that she was still a kind person at heart. She would not waver on her own principles, and once she had found a goal, she would work tenaciously toward it. As such, he was not too reluctant to take her in as his direct disciple. The true immortal realm Heaven's Path divine art has 7 floors at the moment. While it's hard for me to cultivate something like that, it is at least much better than what she was cultivating previously, Zhongxian thought. While the true immortal realm Heaven's Path divine art still was not perfect, it was at least a complete cultivation technique. In terms of quality, it was on par with the simplified Heaven's Path divine art that he had imparted to his other direct disciples thus far. Of course, it was not that he did not want to impart the perfected Heaven's Path divine arts to his direct disciples, but he was the only one who could cultivate them in the entire world. Without any hesitation, Zhongxian quickly sent a telepathic message to Bai Wanqing. I can resolve your current crisis, but you have to acknowledge me as your teacher before I can impart the cultivation technique of my lineage to you. Student Bai Wanqing pays respect to teacher. Bai Wanqing immediately kneeled onto the floor and cried out. She had long wanted to acknowledge Zhongxian as her teacher, but the latter had never expressed anything regarding that matter, so she had been unable to find an opportunity to broach the subject. As such, when this opportunity presented itself before her, she delightfully grasped it without any hesitation. Good. This is my cultivation technique. Practice it well. After accepting Bai Wanqing's bow, Zhongxian swiftly modified the Heaven's Path divine art to suit her constitution before imparting it into her mind. At the same time, he whipped out innumerable silver needles and infused them with Heaven's Path shenqi before inserting them all over her body. Gu. The rampaging spiritual energy swiftly calmed down under the Heaven's Path shenqi's guidance, thus alleviating the excruciating pain from the energy inflation that Bai Wanqing was suffering from. This cultivation technique. Bai Wanqing swiftly browsed through the cultivation technique that she had just been imparted, and she could not help but narrow her eyes in amazement. This cultivation technique was fundamentally similar to what she had been practicing at the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion all along, but it was much more profound and powerful. If the spiritual energy that she could absorb after driving her old cultivation technique was nothing more than a small trickling stream, with this new cultivation technique, she could foresee her capacity expanding to that of a raging river. Knowing that this cultivation technique would be able to save her life, she quickly closed her eyes and began practicing it. Her cultivation immediately began soaring. Lesser true immortal. Greater true immortal. Earthly true immortal. 6 hours had passed, and her cultivation progressed without the slightest resistance until it finally reached heavenly true immortal. Chapter 1993 Wuhai Mark T. Since you have become my student, you have to heed my instructions from now on, Zhongxian said solemnly. Also, you mustn't impart the cultivation technique I have just taught you to anyone else, and this includes Elder Bai Yi. Are you able to do that? Yes, I can. Bai Wanqing nodded anxiously. The fact that a golden page had formed meant that Bai Wanqing was sincerely thankful to him and was unlikely to leak his secrets, so he was not too worried. The concept of lineage was important in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as well. A student was expected to follow their teacher's words, and the debt of nurturing was something that must never be forgotten. Good. I'll need to head out for a while. You should remain here to reinforce your cultivation, Zhongxian said. Following which, he opened the door and left the room. He had managed to acquire the superior immortal pills required for him to advance his cultivation, so what he had to do now was find more true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals to perfect his Heaven's Path divine art. The current destination that he had in mind was the Wuhai market, as he thought that it might be possible for the books that he required to be on sale there. Of course, these books were likely to be pricey, but he did not need to buy the books, just collect them into the Library of Heaven's Path. He had looked at the map beforehand, so he knew that the Wuhai market was located nearby. Even without riding on an aerial beast, it only took him an hour of leisurely strolling in order to reach his destination. As expected of a market in a first-tier city, the Wuhai market was bustling with huge crowds. It was already teeming with people even before making his way in. The first floor was filled with normal vendors, selling stuff like medicinal herbs, precious ores, weapons, and the like. After taking a swift look around, Zhongxian shook his head in disappointment. There were simply too many counterfeit products. Even without using the Library of Heaven's Path, he could see through them easily. Furthermore, most of them were below pseudo-immortal tier, so they were of no use to him at all. Zhongxian walked up to a vendor and passed a sword pavilion coin over. May I know if there are any places here that sell cultivation technique manuals? The cultivation technique manuals are usually sold at auction, the vendor hurriedly replied, accepting the coin in delight. A single sword pavilion coin was enough for him to live comfortably for a month. The cultivation technique manuals don't have to be particularly profound. Ordinary ones would do as well, Zhongxian added. The cultivation technique manuals that needed to be auctioned were bound to be invaluable. But to him, whether a cultivation technique was high-tier or rare did not matter at all. What he needed was quantity, not quality. Of course, there was no doubt that higher quality cultivation techniques had fewer flaws, which meant that they could more easily perfect his Heaven's Path divine art. However, the issue with that was that their numbers were too limited, so it was simply not worth the time sourcing for them, and their prices were scarily exorbitant. Ordinary cultivation techniques too? Well, there are plenty of those over there at the Boundless Knowledge Pavilion. With just a single sword pavilion coin, you can read all the books you want in there. However, the cultivation technique manuals there are quite ordinary, such that even I won't cultivate them. Most of us go there to read those kinds of books instead, the vendor replied with a knowing smile. Considering how the person before him could casually tip him a single sword pavilion coin, it was likely that he was an inner disciple or even a core disciple. If so, his expectations on cultivation techniques were bound to be very high. Considering how the cultivation technique manuals in the Boundless Knowledge Pavilion could not even catch the eye of a fake medicine peddler like him, there was no way that the other party would be interested in them. Most likely, the cultivation techniques that this young man spoke of were referring to something else. Zhongxian was perplexed by the mysterious smile the vendor was directing toward him, but he still waved his hand and said, "Take me over to take a look." "All right." The vendor chuckled a little as he quickly led the way. Soon, as they arrived before a bookstore, the vendor gestured and said, "We have arrived." Zhongxian took a brief glance inside, and there were indeed many different books on display. Cultivation technique manuals, battle technique manuals, old newspapers and magazines, notebooks and diaries. Of course, there was also those stuff that the vendor was referring to, which made Zhongxian immediately comprehend the meaning behind the vendor's earlier licentious smile. The covers of those books were particularly eye-catching, such that they seemed to leap out at those passing the bookstore. Zhongxian passed a single sword pavilion coin over and walked in. He quickly swept through the contents on the shelves, and it did not take him long to collect all the cultivation technique manuals. A moment later, he shook his head bitterly. There was a huge number of cultivation technique manuals, but they were all of pseudo-immortal realm and below. There was not a single true immortal realm cultivation technique manual, so of course, those books did nothing to resolve the flaws in his Heaven's Path divine art. Thus, Zhongxian left with bookstore with a gloomy look on his face. How was it? Those cultivation techniques are horrible, aren't they? The vendor, who had yet to leave, asked. If you want higher-tier cultivation techniques, there's indeed one way to acquire them. Oh! Not too long ago, the Wuhai market auction acquired a treasure. They brought many appraisers in, but none of them were able to ascertain what it was. If someone is able to accurately appraise exactly what the treasure is, they will be specially authorized to enter the auction's treasury and choose any cultivation technique manual they wish, the vendor said in a hushed voice. A treasure? Zhongxian was stunned. That reminded him of the mission that he had taken on before coming over to Wuhai City. If he had known that there was actually such an opportunity involved, he would have come way earlier. Nevertheless, it was still better to clarify the matter lest he was disappointed like he had been before. So, he asked, it sounds like the auction has an impressive collection of cultivation technique manuals. Do you know if they have any true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals? Of course. The Wuhai market auction has 500 years of history, and the strongest expert they employ to guard the treasures are already at the half-high immortal realm. They are bound to have plenty of true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals, the vendor exclaimed vehemently. Then, he looked around him before lowering his voice slightly. There are often auctions where cultivation technique manuals are sold, and based on my guesses, I think that the Wuhai market auction has secretly been making copies of them. The auction house did not have the right to make copies of the cultivation technique manuals that their clients were selling, so the Wuhai market auction had to be doing this behind their clients' back. However, under the rules of the auction, the items that were sold during the auction would have to be placed under the custody of the auction house prior to the auctioning, so there was no way the client would know or verify whether a copy had been made. According to what the vendor was saying, it seemed like making copies of cultivation technique manuals had already become one of the implicit rules within the auction house. It was just that no one was willing to point it out. Hearing those words, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, it was good news that the auction house had true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals. It was truly good luck that they had taken on the appraisal mission. After confirming the location of the auction house, Zhongxian bade the vendor farewell before quickly making his way over. Do you have an invitation letter? At the entrance of the auction hall, Zhongxian was halted by a guard. I am a disciple from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, and I have taken on the mission of the Wuhai market to appraise its artifact, Zhongxian said as he took out his mission token. The guard took a look at the mission token before bowing deeply. Welcome. This way, please. The Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was one of the 6 sects, and Wuhai City happened to be under its jurisdiction. On top of that, it was a known fact that the sect only took in top-notch geniuses as their disciples. Naturally, the guard would dare not be discourteous to Zhongxian. Under the guard's lead, Zhongxian entered a room. Within the room, there was an old man standing before an artifact, examining it closely. Elder He, this young man over here is a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. He has come here to take on the appraisal mission, the guard reported to the old man. Let him wait there for a moment. Without even turning around, Elder He continued examining the artifact before him with an agitated look on his face. With a slight frown, Zhongxian assessed the old man who was addressed as Elder He carefully. The latter appeared to be in his 60s, and the aura that he emanated felt heavy and powerful. He was a high immortal realm expert. The artifact before him was a sculpture of roughly a kai tall. It was painted with beautifully contrasting colors that accentuated its aesthetics. Just accounting for the painting skills, it was definitely the work of someone who was as competent as a 9-star painter of the master-teacher continent. Zhongxian could not really recognize what it was, but he could feel a fleeting aura from it that felt serene and calming. Wonderful! Wonderful! Elder He could not help but exclaim in delight. Not too far away, a smile slowly formed on a middle-aged man's lips as he saw Elder He's reaction. With a respectful tone, he asked, Elder He, may if I know if it's authentic? Based on my appraisal, this sculpture was indeed left behind by High Immortal Du He. He used the Calm Heart Stone to carve this sculpture, so if one uses it at the core of a formation, it could be used to bring serenity to one's mind, so one need not worry about facing inner demons during one's cultivation, Elder, he said with a smile. You have my deepest thanks, Elder, he. Hearing that the sculpture was indeed authentic, the middle-aged man delightfully raised his hand, and a subordinate quickly walked up and passed a bag of jingling ethereal coins over. Auction Master Wang, you are too courteous. Elder, he said. No, it's only right for me to offer this to you. I have troubled you to appraise for me, Elder, he, so this is just a small sum that represents my appreciation for your help, the middle-aged man addressed as Auction Master Wang quickly replied. Following which, he walked up to the sculpture and carefully stored it in a cushioned container, intending to move it somewhere else. Seeing this, Zhongxian could not help but shake his head. However, he chose not to say a word. At the same time, after finishing his appraisal, Elder, he turned around and saw that it was a young man behind him. In that instant, a slight frown could be seen between his brows. Are you the disciple from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion who took on the mission? Zhongxian nodded. May I know what treasure you wish for me to appraise? He could not be bothered to waste his breath on things that did not involve him. Right now, he just wanted to quickly finish his appraisal so that he could access his books. No need to hurry, Elder, he said as he took a seat in a nearby chair. He lifted his teacup and took a sip before turning to look at Zhongxian with a hint of disdain in his eyes. Disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion are formidable in their swordsmanship, there is no denying that. However, their appraisal skills seem to be sorely lacking. 2 of your peers came not too long ago, but they couldn't discern anything at all, so I kicked them out. Are you here to give it a try, too? If you don't have any capability, I advise you say so now so that we don't waste each other's time. It would be troublesome for me and humiliating for you if we had to do this the hard way. Those words cast a slight shadow over Zhongxian's eyes. It was clear that the other party was making light of him. I know that my words might not sound nice, but I'm sure that there's some truth to my words. I have heard much about how talented the disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion are, but I'm afraid that your expertise stops at swordsmanship. I'll have to humbly ask you not to insult us appraisers. Elder, he shook his head. He waved his hand and said, Yuan Qing, take these 2 sword pavilion coins, give them to that young man over there, and invite him to leave. I don't need anyone causing any undue trouble here. Yes. The guard who had brought Zhongxian in took 2 sword pavilion coins from Elder his hands and passed them over to Zhongxian. Here. Paying no heed to the guard's actions at all, Zhongxian looked at Elder he deeply and scoffed, causing undue trouble? He did not want to get involved in unnecessary matters, but this fellow just had to stretch his face over for him to slap. Did the other party's cheek feel itchy or something? He walked over to the middle-aged man, who was in the midst of packing the sculpture, and said, Friend, I advise you not to take this item with you just yet. Oh! Auction Master Wang stopped his actions and turned to look at Zhongxian with a perplexed frown. He had heard the conversation between the 2 of them, and while Elder he did not fear offending the disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, he was not so audacious. I'd just like to give you a word of warning. The item in your hands isn't an artifact from High Immortal Duhe at all, nor is it a sculpture made out of Calm Heart Stone. If you use it as the core of a formation, it won't take long for your cultivation to go berserk. Zhongxian remarked calmly. What do you mean by that? I just appraised the artifact, and it was certainly left behind by High Immortal Duhe. Do you have any questions about the results of my appraisal? Elder, his face darkened. He had been appraising for over 100 years, and he had hardly made any mistakes to date. Yet, a 20-year-old man dared challenge his judgment. Naive. Questions about the results of your appraisal? Zhongxian shook his head with a pitiable smile on his face. No, I just have 2 words for it, utter bullsh*t. If Auction Master Wang really listens to your words here, he will surely lose his life within 3 days. Chapter 1994 Blood-Soaked Stone Audacious. Elder, his face reddened in fury. He had been the chief appraiser of this auction house for nearly 100 years, and the artifacts that he had looked at numbered at least 8,000. Even if his knowledge was lacking from time to time, his appraisals had never been too far off the mark. Yet, this young man was actually saying that Auction Master Wang would die within 3 days if he believed his words. There was no greater insult to his professionalism than this. You are the one who is audacious. You were hired to appraise an artifact, but an error you have made ended up putting your client's life at risk. You should know the consequences of that, right? Zhongxian replied coldly. Having read through the books of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, he had learned quite a bit about the occupations in the Azure. While the appraiser occupation did not have a specific heritage, unlike the master-teacher continent, and there was no particular guild managing it, there were still some strict conventions surrounding the occupation. If an appraiser made a mistake, not only would they lose their reputation, they might even be demanded to pay a huge compensation fee, which could bankrupt them. In extreme cases, the appraiser might even be dealt with through the law. With the current situation, if someone lost their life as a result of his appraisal error, he might be stripped of his cultivation and banished from the land. Utter nonsense. Hearing the words of the young man, his face warped in fury. He flung the sleeves of his robe and bellowed, "Do you know the consequences of attempting to besmirch an appraiser's reputation? I demand that you give me an explanation right now. Otherwise, even if I have to make a scene before sect leader Han, I'll make sure that you are severely punished for the lies you dared spout about me." Considering how important reputation was to appraisers, it was also a convention in the Azure that those who dared carelessly besmirch the reputation of an appraiser would be severely dealt with. These conventions were made out of necessity for fear that the markets would fall into turmoil, so they were acknowledged by most cultivators of the Azure. As such, even a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion would have to be severely punished if he dared infringe it. Besmirching an appraiser's reputation? A playful smile crept onto Zhongxian's lips, and he shook his head. We'll see. Meanwhile, Auction Master Wang was a little conflicted about the situation before him. He could not afford to offend this young man or the esteemed elder he, which placed him in a terribly difficult position. You mentioned that my teacher has erred in his appraisal, but are you able to prove it? If you can't prove me, that will leave us no choice but to suspect that you are intentionally sullying my teacher's reputation, the guard named Yuan Qing cried out indignantly. He was apprehensive of confronting a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but he could not watch by the side as his teacher was being insulted by another man. Don't worry, that's what I'm just about to do. Zhongxian chuckled softly. He turned to Auction Master Wang and asked, "Do you have any test rats or the like here?" Similar to the pill sample beast on the master-teacher continent, there were also creatures in the Azure that could be used to test the effects of certain medicine on living beings. As an auction house, there was bound to be something of the sort there for appraisal purposes. We do have some. Yuan Qing was the one who replied. He looked at his teacher, and seeing the lack of reaction from the latter, he quickly backed out of the room. Soon enough, he returned with a rabbit-like saint beast in his hand. It was only at Saint One Dan, which was equivalent to the strength of a powerless child in the Azure. Seeing that what he needed had been prepared, Zhongxian turned to Auction Master Wang and smiled. "Pardon me, but may I trouble you to bring your sculpture out once more?" Auction Master Wang hesitated for a moment, but he eventually followed Zhongxian's instructions. Without touching the sculpture at all, Zhongxian took out a brush and calmly drew out a bizarre pattern in the surroundings. Taking Zhongxian's actions into sight, he was stunned for a moment before he suddenly burst out laughing. "Isn't that the calming heart formation? You are intending to create the formation using a brush?" He immediately understood Zhongxian's intentions as soon as he recognized those bizarre patterns. The latter was simply trying to construct a calming heart formation on the spot to test the validity of his appraisal. Just that. Setting up a calming heart formation required formation flags and all kinds of treasures. What could mere brush and ink possibly do? What a joke. The effects will be reduced through an ink formation. Otherwise, I fear that this saint beast won't even last a single breath, Zhongxian remarked impassively. It did not take long for him to complete his formation, and he quickly threw his brush back into his storage ring. With a light tap, he infused his zhenqi into the calming heart formation. Wang. The brilliant light glowed from the ink formation, and it swiftly engulfed the sculpture as well, turning it into the heart of the formation. In an instant, a calming energy rippled within the perimeters of the formation. Without a doubt, cultivating in such an atmosphere would surely enhance one's rate of cultivation significantly. This Elder he did not think that the other party would actually successfully create the calming heart formation with just a brush and ink, and his eyebrows shot up in astonishment. Even the cultivator who was the most skilled in formations there would not be able to pull off a feat like that. Just how deep an understanding did the young man have regarding the formation, the surroundings, and the sculpture in order to pull this off? This would not have worked if there was even a single error. At that moment, he suddenly felt an ominous premonition. On the other hand, after the formation was activated, Zhongxian turned to Yuan Qing and said, "I'll have to trouble you to place the Saint Beast into the formation." Yuan Qing quickly headed forward and placed the rabbit in his hand into the formation. Under the effects of the calming energy, the slightly agitated rabbit swiftly calmed down. Soon, its eyelids drooped down, and it seemed like it would fall asleep at any moment. "Didn't you say that the sculpture is fake?" Seeing the current state of the rabbit, Elder he harumphed in glee. Through his appraisal, he had deduced that the sculpture complemented well with the calming heart formation, and it would accentuate its effects. Yet, this fellow accused him of lying and even claimed that doing so would place one in danger. The rabbit in the formation was proving that his words were right. "There's no hurry, just enjoy the show." Zhongxian chuckled softly as he turned around and took a seat on a nearby chair. Making himself at home, he turned to Qing Yuan and said, "Brew me a pot of tea." Qing Yuan clenched his fists tightly. "Go on." Elder he looked at Zhongxian with narrowed eyes, but he still gestured for Qing Yuan to do as the young man had said with a wave of his hand. While he was not terribly fond of the young man before him, the latter was still a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. At his teacher's command, Yuan Qing quickly left the room and brought a pot of tea back. Zhongxian sipped on it calmly as he waited patiently. Roughly an hour later, the sleeping rabbit finally opened its eyes, and it seemed to be a little agitated. "What's happening?" Elder he was stunned. Under normal circumstances, any beast that was placed in the perimeter of the calming heart formation would remain absolutely silent. The fact that it was starting to get a little agitated showed that something was off. "Who?" The rabbit abruptly rose to its feet, and with reddened eyes, it leaped straight toward the sculpture before it. "Catcher!" Crashing right into the sculpture, its stubby legs twitched a little before it finally breathed its last. "Catcher!" The teacup that Auction Master Wang was holding was crushed into bits as tea seeped through the cracks between his fingers. With a livid voice, he asked, "Elder he, what's going on?" He could almost see himself in the place of the dead rabbit in the formation. If he had really cultivated using that sculpture, that might have been his outcome. Elder he was also stunned by the sight before him. Nothing should have been wrong based on his appraisal. Why would such a situation occur? There was completely no chance for the disciple from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion to have tampered with the formation under their close watch. All the latter did was draw the calming heart formation. It was true that the way in which the formation was set up was a little bizarre, but there was definitely nothing wrong with the formation. In other words, the rabbit's death was related to the sculpture. Seeing that Elder he did not have an answer for him, Auction Master Wang turned his gaze upon the young man in the room. "What's going on? You wish to know the reason?" Zhongxian asked with a mysterious smile. "That's right." Auction Master Wang nodded. This was simply too terrifying. He had paid such a hefty sum to purchase this sculpture so that he could calm his mind and dispel himself of his inner demons. Yet, such a matter actually happened instead. Unless he made sense out of it, there was no way that he would dare use this sculpture ever again. "If you want to know the reason, you just have to lift the sculpture up," Zhongxian said. "All right," Auction Master Wang replied as he picked the sculpture up. Even though the Saint Beast had crashed into it earlier, it did not leave the slightest scratch on it due to its overwhelming resilience. "Lift it over your head," Zhongxian instructed. Thus, Auction Master Wang lifted it even higher. "Now, with all of your strength, smash it on the ground," Zhongxian said. "Smash it on the ground?" Auction Master Wang was stunned. It was true that the sculpture was exceptionally resilient due to being forged of calm heart stone, but it would still shatter if one threw it on the ground forcefully. This was something that he had spent a huge portion of his savings on. How could he smash it like that? "Indeed. Don't you want to know what it is? Smash it." Zhongxian replied nonchalantly as he sipped on his tea. If you can't bear to part with it, you can take it back home and use it just as Elder, he said. Auction Master Wang's eyes twitched. By the side, Elder, his body also stiffened up. He wanted to refute Zhongxian's words, but he was unable to find any words to say. With the rabbit smashing its head against the sculpture, who would dare use it anymore? If you still aren't able to explain it after it's shattered, are you going to compensate Auction Master Wang for his losses? Elder, he asked. If I explain it, are you going to compensate Auction Master Wang? Zhongxian asked. If your explanation makes sense, I'll admit that I have made a misjudgment and compensate him accordingly. Elder, he harumphed. It was only right for an appraiser to be punished if he erred in his judgment. Very well. I'm willing to compensate for the sculpture if I am unable to explain it, Zhongxian replied calmly. All right then. Gritting his teeth, Auction Master Wang threw the sculpture down with all his might. Catcher. The sculpture immediately shattered into many fragments upon impact. Who? But as the rock crumbled, a malicious aura gushed out from within, causing the crowd to shudder a little. Elder, he quickly lowered his head, only to see that the shattered portion were crimson in color. His face immediately drained of color as realization struck him. This is blood-soaked stone. Blood-soaked stone was known to appear on battlefields or places where massacres had occurred. Over time, as fresh blood seeped into the stone, a tremendous amount of killing intent would be accumulated in a single place. More importantly, it was shrouded by the malicious intent of vengeful spirits. Putting aside coming into proximity with it, the malicious intent could even afflict others from a distance. Carelessness could easily lead to one's cultivation going berserk, and in even more extreme cases, there were those who lost their rationality and eventually went insane. Blood-soaked stone could be said to be the exact opposite existence of Calm Heart stone. He had been certain that the sculpture before him was forged out of Calm Heart stone, so why would it suddenly turn into the former after it was shattered? Elder, he immediately found himself completely dumbfounded. Chapter 1995. Zhongxian's explanation. The others in the room were flabbergasted. Even though Auction Master Wang was not an appraiser and did not know too much about appraising, the fact that he had gone to the extent of sourcing this sculpture showed that he knew a fair bit about Calm Heart stone. Naturally, he could discern that the material that was before him was its polar opposite, blood-soaked stone. To think that he had ended up buying the complete opposite of what he intended to purchase. And to make matter worse, Elder, he had even claimed that it was Calm Heart stone. If he had not met this young man, it probably would not have been long before he was afflicted by the malicious intent lingering around the sculpture. Soon enough, he might have committed suicide just as the rabbit had done earlier. A mixture of fear and rage surged into Auction Master Wang's head as he turned to the old man before him and bellowed, "What's going on here? Elder he, is this what my trust in you amounts to?" Usually, he would not dare speak to Elder he in such a manner, but he was just moments away from sealing his fate. There was no way that he could remain calm under such circumstances. Elder, his body trembled. He did not know what to say. He squatted down to pick up fragments of the rock, but no matter how he examined them, they were all blood-soaked stone. There was no trace of Calm Heart stone to be seen at all. In an instant, he looked as if he had aged a decade. After a long moment of silence, he finally turned to Zhongxian and asked, "May I know how I should address you?" "I am Zhongxian," Zhongxian replied. "Brother Zhong, I was certain that what I saw in the sculpture earlier was Calm Heart stone," Elder he said, "so why would?" He was no longer maintaining the haughty attitude from before, and the way he addressed Zhongxian had also turned into a more polite brother. He was certain that there was nothing wrong with his judgment, but somehow, things still turned out this way. Given that the other party actually knew of this in advance, he must have known where things had gone wrong. His prejudice against the disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was not completely unjustified. 2 inner disciples had gone there before Zhongxian to try their luck, but it turned out that they did not know anything about appraisal at all. Not only did they make a fool out of themselves, they even accidentally destroyed an invaluable artifact. As a result of that, even he had been implicated. For this reason, he really did not have a good opinion of disciples from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion trying to act as appraisers. When he saw how young Zhongxian was, he had immediately assumed that the latter was there to try his luck as well. Who could have known that he would stumble upon a true master? In terms of eye of discernment, this young man seemed to be far ahead of him. On the other hand, seeing that elder he had finally put away his superior attitude, Zhongxian could not be bothered to keep up with his scornful attitude. He picked up one of the fragments on the ground and began explaining. Calm heart stone and blood-soaked stone are like two sides of a coin. Despite their opposing natures, they are able to affect the psyche of others through the energy they emanate. I don't need to explain any more about this, right? The crowd nodded in agreement. In the strictest terms, calm heart stone and blood-soaked stone could be considered spirit stones. Ordinary spirit stones were filled with attributeless spiritual energy that provided energy for others to cultivate, whereas these two stones were stored with special kinds of energy that would affect one's psyche. Elder, his appraisal was not completely off the mark. This sculpture is indeed an artifact from High Immortal Du He, and it was a piece that the latter personally made. In fact, even the layer of painting was done personally by him, Zhongxian explained. If it was left by him, then, elder, he was perplexed. Since that was the case, he should not have been wrong. Why did things turn out like that? Do you know who High Immortal Du He is? Zhongxian asked. I have heard of him. By the side, Yuan Qing spoke up. High Immortal Du He was known to be a divine physician 100 years ago. He had saved countless people in his lifetime, and as a result of that, there were many people who worshipped his idol. Praying to him is not just a gesture of respect to him, it's also viewed to be a prayer for safety. Why would someone as benevolent as High Immortal Du He create such an artifact to poison others? Given all the good deeds that High Immortal Du He had done, it was hard to believe that he would disguise a blood-soaked stone as a calm heart stone in order to mislead others into disaster. Poison? You are misunderstanding something. Zhongxian shook his head. The reason High Immortal Du He created this artifact wasn't to harm others but to save people. Save people? Zhongxian's words were only making the crowd get more and more confused. This artifact is indeed created out of a blood-soaked stone, but you have neglected something. It's for a reason that High Immortal Du He put so much effort into painting the artifact. While it might seem to be for aesthetic purposes, he was, in actuality, inscribing a unique formation on the artifact with his ink in order to suppress the killing intent within, similar to what I did earlier. Not only so, he even imbued it with energy so that it would continuously emanate a calming aura, Zhongxian explained. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible to see through the killing intent. That's also why Elder he misunderstood that it was Calm Heart Stone. Elder he nodded in agreement to those words. He was indeed unable to discern the presence of killing intent in the stone. And indeed, the killing intent sealed within the artifact wouldn't affect one typically. However, if you used a formation and attempt to draw out the energy within the stone, that would be a different story. Your actions would damage the ink formation that High Immortal Du He painted on the surface of the sculpture, and to make matters worse, you wouldn't even notice anything is wrong initially as the killing intent is sealed too deeply within. As you cultivate with the sculpture, it's inevitable that the killing intent would slowly seep into your body. Your rationality would gradually be eroded, causing you to descend into lunacy. Not only would you attempt to kill yourself, you might even bring harm upon your family and friend. Just imagining the possible consequences was enough to leave auction master Wang shuddering uncontrollably. Before he knew it, his hair was already drenched with sweat. This was also why appraisers were of the utmost importance in the world. An artifact, when used well, could be an invaluable treasure to a cultivator. However, if a cultivator failed to recognize the true nature of an artifact and used it recklessly, the consequences could be disastrous. This was a perfect example of that. I don't dare claim that I have a deep understanding of High Immortal Du He, but my guess is that his purpose for creating this artifact was to save patients who have fallen into a coma. Zhongxian explained. There's no better way than this to stimulate the consciousness of patients who have fallen into a coma and can't be woken up through any other methods. This sculpture would first release a calming aura to lower one's guard, allowing killing intent to discreetly creep into one's soul. The killing intent would agitate one's soul, causing one to swiftly awaken. This reminded him of how Wei Ruyan had fallen into a coma back then because she was unable to withstand the prowess of the two unique constitutions that she was born with. In the end, he had needed to resort to other medicine before he succeeded. If he had such an artifact with him back then, it should have worked as well. A body would still be protected by its reflexive defense mechanisms even in an unconscious state. If one attempted to afflict a soul with killing intent directly, one's soul would automatically guard against it. At the same time, if the concentration of killing intent was too great, it was more likely to kill a patient before even awakening them. Thus, High Immortal Du he had to come up with such a method. It was because Zhongxian had a similar experience in the past that he felt that the other party had created this artifact for treatment purposes. I have studied High Immortal Du his life, and his young daughter once fell into a coma due to an incident, and no matter what he did, she just wouldn't wake up. The situation continued for half a year till he finally found a method to successfully rouse his daughter's consciousness. He never revealed the trick, so this matter became a huge mystery among the local physician community back then. Could this be the reason? Elder he was stunned. As an appraiser, he had studied the history of famous figures as it helped him in identifying artifacts. He had read about High Immortal Du his affairs, so he knew about the incident back then regarding the other party's daughter. It was only after hearing Zhongxian's words that he finally came to a realization. That should probably be the case. There's no such thing as a good or an evil artifact, it all depends on how the user utilizes it, Zhongxian replied with a nod. I see. Elder he nodded in realization. He looked at the young man before him with a complicated expression on his face before sighing deeply. I concede. I have lost to you. Auction Master Wang, allow me to compensate your loss. Elder he, you are too courteous. Auction Master Wang quickly replied. Following which, Elder he turned to Zhongxian and bowed deeply in gratitude. Brother Zhong, I am extremely grateful to you. Not only have you saved Auction Master Wang, you have indirectly saved me as well. While the young man did question his professionalism and put him down before Auction Master Wang, thinking back, it was such an action that had saved him. Otherwise, if something had really happened to Auction Master Wang in the midst of his cultivation, his career as an appraiser would have come to a screeching halt. Zhongxian nodded politely in response to Elder his words. May I know if I'm qualified to complete the mission that was assigned to my sect now? Of course, of course. Elder he nodded. This way please. Considering how the young man was able to see through something that had escaped his notice, there was no doubt that the young man's eye of discernment was indeed far sharper than his. He might really be able to resolve the issue that had rendered him helpless all this while. Following behind Elder he, Zhongxian walked out of the room. Chapter 1996 Luo Ruoxin. It did not take long for the two of them to arrive before a sealed chamber. There were many layers of formations constructed over it, and there were 4 true immortal realm guards standing outside. A middle-aged man dressed in a thick fur coat noticed Elder his presence and quickly walked over to greet him. Elder he introduced the middle-aged man to Zhongxian. This person here is Boss Hu of Wuhai Market. Boss Hu, this young man over here is a core disciple of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, Zhongxian. He might be young, but his expertise as an appraiser is far above mine, far above yours. Boss Hu was surprised by Elder he_'s high evaluation of Zhongxian, such that he could not help but reassess the young man before him once more. Elder he was the chief appraiser of the Wuhai market, and the two of them had known each other for several decades. As such, he was very familiar with the other party's temperament. Considering how formally Elder he was introducing this young man to him, it was likely that this young man was the real deal. It was just that he could not help but harbor a hint of doubt at the back of his mind. Appraisal was highly dependent on the scope of one's knowledge. The older one was, the more knowledgeable one was likely to be. It was a little hard for him to imagine a 20-year-old being truly proficient as an appraiser. Despite his doubts, he did not show any sign of making light of Zhongxian at all. Instead, he turned to the latter and bowed slightly. Brother Zhong, it's a pleasure to meet you. For Elder he to have such a high opinion of someone as young as you must be a truly capable individual. Boss Hu, you are flattering me, Zhongxian replied calmly. The middle-aged man before him did not have a particularly impressive presence, having sealed his zhenqi deeply so as to not reveal any hint of it. Nevertheless, through the eye of insight, Zhongxian was still able to see that the other party had already reached half-high immortal. With such a level of cultivation, the middle-aged man could be considered among the top echelons of Wuhai City. "Come, follow me." After trading some pleasantries, Boss Hu took the two of them into the room ahead. Without wasting too much time, Boss Hu gestured toward the object ahead and said, "Brother Zhong, this is the artifact that I would like you to appraise." At the center of the room was an object around the height of a person wrapped in a layer of black cloth. Pulling the cloth off, a glistening rock dyed in the striking color deep crimson was revealed. It seemed to have been worked on before, such that the gleam reflecting off the rock was particularly bright. It was slightly similar to a blood jade, but again, it did not really seem so either. "It's just a piece of rock." Zhongxian frowned. Considering the exceptionally high reward for the mission, as well as the fact that a skilled appraiser like Elder he was unable to discern its true nature, he had expected an invaluable treasure of some kind, but it turned out to be a piece of rock instead. This was truly surprising. Don't underestimate it just because it's a piece of rock. It has an appearance similar to a blood jade, but the blood jade doesn't have a glow as warm as it. Its texture is reminiscent of that of a blood crystal, but blood crystals are known to exist in smaller sizes. I have browsed through innumerable books, and there was nothing that tallied with this rock. At least 100 appraisers have been brought in to appraise the rock, but none of them have been able to discern its origin or name. As such, we chose to seek the help of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Elder, he said. There were several reasons that they had chosen to engage the help of core disciples. Firstly, most core disciples in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion came from illustrious clans, so there was a chance that they might have chanced upon something similar to it. Secondly, core disciples were not as powerful as the elders, so even if they appraised the rock to be something valuable and attempted to take it for themselves, they would still be able to do something about it. It was a survival of the fittest world that they lived in, so this was something that could not be helped. Besides, it would be truly scary if the enemy feigned a lack of interest but resorted to underhanded means to acquire it. That would really be extremely troublesome. Dealing with a core disciple was simply much easier. Hearing those words, Zhongxian nodded slightly. While they were speaking, he had already tried assessing the rock with his eye of insight, but to his astonishment, he was unable to discern it. He had read all the books in the libraries of the inner disciples, core disciples, and elders. In terms of general knowledge, even elders who had lived on the Forsaken Continent for centuries would not be a match for him. Yet, he was actually unable to identify the rock through his eye of insight. There was indeed something amiss with it. "Have you tested the rock's attributes yet?" Zhongxian asked. If it was just an unidentifiable rock, Boss Hu would not have gone to the extent of gathering so many appraisers and even seeking help from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. There had to be some sign that hinted to him that this rock was not an ordinary artifact. "We did. The most intense flames used by the strongest blacksmith in Wuhai City are unable to phase it, and high immortal tier weapons can't even leave a scratch on it," Elder he said. Knowing that such information was crucial to appraising the artifact, they chose not to withhold any information at all. It's impermeable to flames, and even high immortal tier weapons aren't able to scratch it. Zhongxian was astonished. High immortals could already be considered the top existences on the Azure, but even a weapon of that tier was unable to leave a scratch on it. Could this stone have reached semi-divinity or even beyond? That would explain why Boss Hu was willing to spend so much money on it. Most likely, he was planning on selling this item for an astronomical sum after confirming what it was. "Brother Zhong, I'll have to trouble you to take a good look at the stone and help us figure out what it is." Elder he clasped his fist. "Very well," Zhongxian replied as he walked up to the stone. The crimson emerald stone had a heavy presence that weighed down on one. Without even coming into contact with it, Zhongxian could tell that even he would have trouble trying to lift it with his current cultivation realm. While he was only at the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm, his strength should be comparable to a heavenly true immortal. Despite that, he was still incapable of lifting it up. This stone was really getting more and more interesting to him. "Brother Zhong, Do you need a compass or any other equipment for your appraisal? Elder, he asked as he watched Zhongxian approaching the rock without any tools in hand. Usually, when it came to appraising stones, one would try to measure its density, weight, and other properties using all kinds of tools in order to make a more informed deduction regarding the identity of the artifact. Yet, Zhongxian was completely empty-handed. It was almost as if he thought that he could figure out what the rock was just by staring at it. In response to Elder his question, Zhongxian waved his hand and said, "There's no need for that for now." He slowly circled the rock contemplatively before reaching out to touch it lightly. Wang. A book materialized in the library of Heaven's Path. He quickly touched the compiled book, and its content flowed into his mind. The next moment, his eyes suddenly narrowed as his body froze on the spot. Elder this young man doesn't seem to be too reliable, Boss who complained with a frown as he watched the young man walking around without taking any measurements at all. As the head of an entire market, he had seen many top-notch appraisers at work, but this was the first time that he had seen any appraiser working in such a manner, not to mention that the other party was oddly young. His means might be a little bizarre, but there's no denying that his eye of discernment far surpasses mine. Elder, he replied. The sculpture earlier had also been made of a rock, and even through the ink formation, the young man had been able to discern the truth of it. That was more than enough to verify the young man's capabilities. The young man might be able to do the same for this rock as well. While the two of them were talking with one another, the young man turned around and looked at them with a tense expression. "Where did you acquire this rock?" Seeing that Zhongxian might have figured something out, Boss who replied honestly, "I bought it from a wandering cultivator." Based on what he said, it seems to be from the Sea of Exiled Stars. Sea of Exiled Stars. Zhongxian mumbled beneath his breath. The Forsaken Continent was simply too huge, and the books in the libraries that he had accessed only consisted of the territories in the vicinity of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. As such, he had never heard of the Sea of Exiled Stars before. The Starchaser Palace, one of the 6 sects, is located on an island in the midst of an ocean. The name of the ocean around them is known as the Sea of Exiled Stars. Elder, he explained. Starchaser Palace. Du Qingyuan. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. Previously, sect leader Han Zhenqiu had told him that if he wanted to know more about the gods, there was no one better to consult than the head of the Starchaser Palace, Du Qingyuan. It was just that the latter might not be willing to talk. After all, speaking carelessly about the gods could cost one's life. And this thing had suddenly appeared in the Sea of Exiled Stars at such a moment. Could there be some kind of link between them? Brother Zhong, have you managed to identify the rock? Elder, he asked. From the moment he first saw this young man, he had remained perfectly calm, as if there was nothing in the world that could faze him. But at this very moment, it was clear to see that he was slightly shaken. Could it be that he had managed to identify the artifact before them? Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, Zhongxian nodded. Yes. What is it? Elder, he asked in agitation. Boss who hurriedly turned his gaze over as well. Zhongxian closed his eyes for a brief moment before replying, "This is a Godblood rock." Godblood rock. Elder he and Boss who looked at one another as their faces slowly warped in astonishment. The term God was not something that could be used carelessly in the Forsaken Continent, or one might risk bringing the wrath of the gods upon oneself. Godblood rock. This was an artifact that they had never heard of before. Was such a thing really existent in the world? Indeed. Zhongxian nodded. The reason he had lost his cool for a moment earlier was not because of the association between the rock and the gods, but that there was a chance that this artifact might have something to do with Luo Ruoxin. It was not to say that Luo Ruoxin's name was written in the book, but the anomaly concerning the Godblood rock was simply too similar to the situation with Luo Ruoxin. He was indeed able to compile a book on the Godblood rock, but other than its name, the book was completely empty. After the Library of Heaven's Path had been upgraded, he could discern heavenly high immortal tier artifacts with ease, and he could even compile a book on the semi-divinity realm Han Zhenqiu. However, anything else that was related to Luo Ruoxin, such as the crimson pendant that he was wearing, reflected only a name and no other details. This rock was the same. This meant that there was a chance that the so-called Godblood rock was related to her. Of course, just this much would not be enough to faze him so. After all, the Library of Heaven's Path had a lot of mysteries that he had not uncovered yet, such that it was not possible for him to predict its behavior entirely. What had really convinced him about the relationship between Luo Ruoxin and the Godblood rock was the slight warmth emanated by the crimson pendant hanging in front of his chest when he came into direct contact with it. He would really have to be a fool if he still could not make the link with this compelling evidence. Does the Godblood rock have something to do with the gods? Boss Hu asked with a hint of fright in his eyes. He would have been more than delighted if this rock was any other treasure. He was confident that something of the quality of this rock could be sold for an exorbitant price. However, if the gods were involved in this, that was really a cause for concern. As someone from the Forsaken Continent, he knew that it was a huge taboo to get too close to the gods. The dissemination of knowledge and objects associated with them was heresy, and it would draw their wrath. If this rock was really related to the gods, auctioning it would surely draw the attention of the Hall of Gods. That could very well be an act of suicide. Given its name, I have no doubt that it's related to the gods. As for how it's formed and what its uses are, I fear that I don't really have an answer to that at the moment. Zhong Xian shook his head. The only thing he had received regarding the artifact was its name. There was no detailed explanation regarding its properties or flaws in the compiled book, so he did not know whether it could be forged into a weapon or whether it had some unique effects or not. However, he knew one thing for sure. If even the Library of Heaven's Path was unable to compile a complete record on the artifact, it was definitely related to the gods. This Boss Hu hesitated. He could tell that there was something special about the rock, so he had spent a heavy price to buy it. After that, he invested huge sums into having it appraised. If it was really related to the gods, what should he do? Should he still sell it or not? With a livid complexion, Boss Hu asked, "Brother Zhong, you mentioned that it's called Godblood rock, but do you have any evidence to prove that?" "Pardon me for asking such a question. It's not that I'm doubting your judgment, but that character has huge implications. I have to be absolutely careful when dealing with this. Evidence to prove it." Zhong Xian pondered for a moment before nodding slightly. "It should be possible to prove it." "How?" Boss Hu asked anxiously. "It's simple. Since it's named the Godblood rock, it must contain some traces of a god's blood. If you have the blood of the most ferocious immortal beast on the continent, you can place it in contact with the Godblood rock and see how it reacts. If the blood displays instinctive subservience toward the Godblood rock, that should be enough to prove that my judgment is not wrong," Zhong Xian replied. Chapter 1997 True Immortal Realm Heaven's Path Divine RT. Even though he did not know the exact properties of the Godblood rock, he did have a deep understanding of immortal beasts. Since this artifact had the name Godblood, it must have something to do with the blood of the gods. If so, even the more terrifying of beasts on the continent would instinctively fear it due to bloodline suppression. This was a method that he had learned from the libraries of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Over the past 1,000 years, there was not a single immortal beast that had dared move in close proximity of the Sword God Hall due to the aura that it emanated. The reason for that was the aura of the gods from the half-character that the founder had snatched from the Hall of Gods. I'll go look for some right now. This method sounded feasible and logical, and it was not too difficult to carry out. Boss Hu and Elder He glanced at one another, and the former nodded slightly before quickly taking his leave. He was extremely anxious to verify whether the artifact was truly the Godblood rock or not. If it was truly Godblood rock, even if he would make a huge loss, he would not dare put an artifact associated with the gods up for auction. After all, there was no amount of money that he could earn that would save him from the wrath of the gods. An hour later, Boss Hu returned with several jade bottles in hand. "These few bottles are filled with the blood essences of high immortal realm beasts," Boss Hu said. There were not many high immortal realm beasts in the world, so it was impossible to find one on the spot. However, if it was just acquiring their blood, there were still some channels for it on the market. The blood of high immortal realm beasts harnessed an incredible amount of energy, making them treasures to raise one's cultivation. As long as one was able to fork out the money, it was still possible to acquire some from the markets or the ethereal hall. This bottle is filled with the blood of a mature ink tiger immortal beast, which is known to possess the cultivation of heavenly high immortal, he explained as he dripped a droplet of blood on the godblood rock. Even though it was just a single droplet, due to the overwhelming amount of spiritual energy it harnessed, it was as heavy as gold. Even as it dropped, one could hear it compressing the air with a sharp wheeze. Whew! Just as it was about to fall on the rock, it suddenly diverted away and flew aside. It was as if it had encountered something that it deeply feared, forcing it to flee. This sight caused Boss Hu's face to stiffen. If he had still harbored some doubts in the past, at that moment, he was already almost certain that Zhongxian's words were right. Of the various bottles of immortal beast blood that he had bought, the ink tiger immortal beast was the strongest of all. On the off case that it might just be an exception, Boss Hu carried on experimenting with the other bottles of blood, but all of them reacted in the same manner. Before reaching the godblood rock, they would flee away, as if they did not dare taint its divine presence at all. This was more than enough to show that the godblood rock harnessed some kind of might that commanded the deference of those immortal beasts. Other than the gods, there was really no other existence that they could think of that would induce such an extreme reaction. This proves what you said. It's indeed the godblood rock, Boss Hu remarked with a deep sigh before raising his gaze to look at Zhongxian. This young man was able to infer that the rock had something to do with the blood of the gods without using any tools at all. This showed that his eye of discernment was frighteningly powerful. Regarding this artifact, do you have any information on when it was acquired, and what was the exact location of its procurement? Zhongxian asked. When I bought it, that person only mentioned the Sea of Exiled Stars. He didn't reveal too much information aside from that, Boss Hu replied. Well, is it possible for you to get in touch with the man who sold you the stone now? There are some questions which I would like to ask him, Zhongxian asked. I'll give it a try. Boss Hu took out his communication jade token and attempted to send the other party a message. However, after waiting for a while, there was still no response. Thus, he could only shake his head helplessly and say, he isn't replying. I haven't seen him around in the city since acquiring the rock, so it might be hard to get in touch with him. Hearing those words, Zhongxian sighed deeply. He had thought that he would be able to question the other party to find out more about the matter, but from the looks of it, it was not possible at the moment. Zhongxian proceeded to ask a few more questions, but he was unable to receive any useful clues regarding the issue, so he could not help but feel a little disappointed. Then, do you know how long it has been since the other party acquired that rock? Zhongxian finally asked. It has been roughly a month since I bought the rock, and I recall the seller saying that the rock had been with him for almost a month. All in all, it should be roughly 2 months since this rock was first found. 2 months. Zhongxian did a swift mental calculation, and slowly, his hands tightened into fists. All in all, it was roughly a year and 4 months after Luo Ruoxin left the master-teacher continent that he entered the Azure. Going by the 1:10 ratio between the time of the Azure and the master-teacher continent, a year and 4 months translated to roughly 500 days, which was equivalent to 50 days in the Azure. It had been 10 days since he arrived in the Azure, so that would add up to a total of 2 months. This evidence seemed to suggest that the godblood rock had something to do with Luo Ruoxin. Of course, whether that was truly the case or not, he would have to personally make a trip to Starchaser Palace to verify it for himself. Coming to understand all that, Zhongxian exhaled deeply before moving on to the other matter at hand. Boss Hu, do you have any true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals here? If possible, could you allow me to browse through your collection? I just need to take a rough look at them, and I can assure you that I won't copy or take them away with me. This was the primary reason he had come here to appraise the artifact. If he wanted to continue tracking Luo Ruoxin's footsteps, it was of the utmost importance for him to raise his cultivation. Only upon becoming a true immortal would he finally have the strength to protect himself in this world. True immortal realm cultivation technique manuals? Hearing the request, Boss Hu pondered for a moment before nodding. I do have some here. They are copies that I have made prior to the auction. If you wish to take a look, Brother Zhong, I would be more than delighted to share them with you. Considering how the young man was able to identify something as rare as this, his eye of discernment could be said to be truly formidable. If he could convince the young man to work at their market, it would surely be a huge boost to their reputation and business. As such, he agreed to the request right away. Besides, the young man was only having a quick browse instead of copying or taking anything away. This was a request that would not hurt him in any way. "Thank you, Boss Hu." Receiving the other party's approval, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. He took one last look at the Crimson Rock and advised, "Boss Hu, the Godblood Rock is deeply linked to the affairs of the gods, so it would be best for you not to auction it. Use a formation to seal it, and ensure that no one else learns of its existence. If, by any chance, I unearth the way to use the Godblood Rock, I'll come back and inform you. I'll be troubling you then, Brother Zhong." Boss Hu replied with a nod. Even if the young man had not said such a thing, he would have done the same. Even if one inflated his guts tenfold, he would not dare do something as disrespectful as auction something with the blood of the god. While his cultivation had reached half-high immortal, he knew that the Hall of Gods could easily destroy everything that he possessed. It would be wise not to risk crossing those experts. More importantly, even if the Hall of Gods chose not to interfere in this matter, the existence of the Godblood Rock would surely draw the attention of the 6 sects. He was just a merchant. He did not want to get involved in the dangerous politics of the continent. Since that was the case, the only option left for him was to seal all news. After arranging for his men to seal the Godblood Rock away, Boss Hu led Zhong Xian over to the market's book collection vault. True to its name, there were many valuable manuals placed on its shelves. While its collection could not compare with the libraries of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, it could still be considered impressive. "There are only 70 books here." Zhong Xian shook his head and sighed deeply. To be exact, there were more than 70 books in the vault, but only 70 of them were true Immortal Realm cultivation technique manuals. It did not seem too likely that the 70 books would be enough to fix the 7 remaining flaws in the Heaven's Path Divine Art. "Compile." Zhong Xian willed as he placed the 70 books he had collected together with the compiled Heaven's Path Divine Art. He did not bear too much hope regarding the matter, but when he flipped open the pages of the newly compiled Heaven's Path Divine Art, his eyes lit up in excitement. To his astonishment, the 7 remaining flaws had actually been resolved. The true Immortal Realm Heaven's Path Divine Art had been perfected. This. Zhong Xian could hardly believe his eyes. He had been thinking that 70 books would only be enough to fix a flaw or two, but they had actually resolved all of the problems at once. Why would that be? Surprised, he quickly browsed through the 70 books that he had just compiled, and soon, he widened his eyes in realization. Naturally, the books sold at auction were not as formidable as the ones available in the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. However, most of them went down an unorthodox route that strayed from the typical path that most cultivation techniques followed. It was also because of this that these cultivation technique manuals could be sold at such a high price, and countless cultivators wanted to acquire them. The 600 books from the sect were orthodox, whereas these 70 books were unorthodox. In a weird way, they complemented one another and covered whatever the other was lacking. As a result of that, all the flaws were resolved. Brother Zhong, may I know if there are any cultivation technique manuals that you are particularly interested in? I can fetch them for you, Boss Hu said with a smile. It's fine, I am done browsing through the books. Thank you for your generosity. Zhong Xian clasped his fist. You are already done browsing through the books. Boss Hu was stunned. The 2 of them had just entered a minute ago, and the young man had only shot a sweeping glance over all the books, but he was already done browsing. It was almost as if he was leaving before the main show had even started. Was this not a little too fast? Are you sure that you are here to browse through the books? Unbelievable. I recently encountered some issues in my cultivation that I was unable to make sense of, so I wanted to look through some books in the hope that it would give me some inspiration. However, the books you have over here don't seem to fit me too well, so rather than confuse myself further with them, I think that it would be better for me to steer clear entirely, Zhong Xian explained with a smile. This. Well, I can understand what you mean. These cultivation techniques do stray a little from the orthodox cultivation techniques that the disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion practice. Boss Hu nodded in agreement, seemingly accepting Zhongxian's excuse. Cultivation was not a field where one would be able to advance further simply by accruing more knowledge. It was a field of knowledge that was too vast for a human to fully understand, so reading too many books that portrayed contrasting views might just lead one to be unable to discern truth from falsehood, thus resulting in one's cultivation going berserk. Brother Zhong, I'm indebted to you for sparing me from a possible calamity. This is a small token of my gratitude, and I hope that you won't turn me down. Before leaving the room, Boss Hu passed a sachet of ethereal coins over. It seemed quite heavy, such that there were probably more than 100 coins inside. To offer so much money at once, it seemed like he was really determined to pull Zhongxian over to his side. Boss Hu, you are too generous. I'm just accomplishing whatever is expected of me. Zhongxian waved his hand, not accepting the money at all. He did love money, but this much money was not enough to draw him in. He did not really want to get too deeply involved with Boss Hu. Besides, he had much more efficient ways of earning money. Farewell. May we meet again in the future, Zhongxian said before making his way out of the market. The reason he had gone to the Wuhai market was to find true immortal realm cultivation technique manuals to perfect his Heaven's Path divine art, and he had accomplished what he had gone there for. Since that was the case, it was about time for him to return to start advancing his cultivation once more. As long as he could raise his cultivation to the heavenly true immortal realm, with the Tongshang sword in hand, he would be able to put up a fight even if his opponent was a heavenly high immortal. By then, he would need not worry too much about his safety when he went to the Sea of Exiled Stars in search of Luo Ruoxin. It was only after leaving the Wuhai market that Zhongxian realized that the sky had already darkened. A brilliant moon hung against a backdrop of twinkling stars. The surroundings were extraordinarily peaceful and quiet. Walking along the streets, Zhongxian slowly made his way over to the ethereal hall branch. However, barely after taking a few steps, his eyes suddenly narrowed. Chapter 1998 Achieving a Breakthrough to True Immortal Spatial Manipulation. A hint of horror flickered across Zhongxian's eyes as goosebumps rose all over his body. If it was anyone else in the azure standing before such a phenomenon, even if they were a high immortal, they might not have managed to recognize what it truly was. However, having mastered spatial prowess in the Master-Teacher continent, he knew the reason for the happenings before him. Someone had sealed his surroundings spatially. In other words, he had been brought into a folded space, and no matter how big a fuss he made, no one in the external world would notice it at all. If it was the Master-Teacher continent, even Saint Nindan cultivators were able to control space to some extent, but in the azure, not even the high immortals would necessarily be able to pull spatial manipulation off. If so, did it mean that the people who had captured him were? Zhongxian quickly turned his sights to the figures before him, and there were 4 of them in total. They were all dressed in black robes, and they emanated a chilling air that left one feeling as if they had come from the depths of hell. 3 heavenly true immortals and 1 heavenly high immortal. Zhongxian frowned. The opponents were weaker than he had expected, which was a huge blessing, but it was still beyond his means to deal with. He was only at the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm. Even if the invincible Heaven's Path divine art was able to deal with heavenly true immortals, subduing 3 of them together with a heavenly high immortal would be pushing the limit. Just who the hell were these people? Why were they coming for him? Making sure to maintain a look of calmness, Zhongxian asked with a nonchalant voice, "Are you here to kill me?" The killing intent that those people emanated was so overwhelming that even ordinary cultivators would have easily noticed it, let alone Zhongxian. Without even turning to look at Zhongxian, the heavenly high immortal glanced at one of the black-robed heavenly true immortal experts and said, "I'll leave it to you. Remember what our master said." "Yes." Hearing the command, the chosen black-robed expert charged forward and thrust his palm down upon Zhongxian. Boom! A destructive force swept across the area like a tornado. Before the palm could land, Zhongxian could already feel a stifling sensation suffocating his chest. His formidable. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. He had never truly fought with a true immortal before, but his swordsmanship duels with the others in the Elder Council had given him a rough gauge of how powerful an average true immortal was. Even though Zhongxian was only at the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm, with the various means that he possessed, he would still be more than a match for heavenly true immortal cultivators. However, the might that the other party emanated actually left his chest feeling a little constricted. There was no doubt that the person before him was far stronger than ordinary true immortals, such that he might even be able to stand on equal ground with an average heavenly high immortal. Retreat. Knowing that there was no time for him to think, the first thing Zhongxian did was dodge the other party's offense by leaping backward. At the same time, he tapped his finger forward. Voila! A surge of sword chi immediately materialized and dissipated the other party's offense, charging right toward the other party's glabella. Since the other party was bent on killing him, he decided to go all out in this attack. He did not infuse the god's sword intent into the attack, but it harnessed his deep understanding of swordsmanship as well. Given how abruptly the attack be launched, he should have been able to defeat this heavenly true immortal before him with ease. Then, before the others had a chance to encircle him, he would find a way to break this spatial seal and flee. You do have some capabilities. It seems like this mission won't be too boring. Just as the sword chi was able to pierce through the other party's forehead, the black-robed expert chuckled softly as he stretched his hand out and swiftly grabbed the incoming sword chi between his fingers. No matter how the sword chi struggled, it was unable to break free of his grasp. Seeing this, Zhongxian's face turned completely livid. With the might that he had put into the earlier attack, even the core disciples of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion would be caught off guard and killed within that single strike. Yet, the heavenly true immortal was able to grab it so easily, as if he was just picking up a bug. Just how powerful could he be? Go! Amid Zhongxian's bewilderment, the black-robed expert reversed the direction of the sword chi that he was holding and shot it back toward Zhongxian. Who? This abrupt attack caught Zhongxian off guard. He immediately backed away. Puha! But still, the sword chi still struck his shoulder, causing fresh blood to ooze out. To think that the day would come when someone would be able to use his own sword chi against him. Not too bad. I was aiming for your throat. The black-robed expert smiled in approval when he saw that he had failed to kill Zhongxian with the counterattack. Suppressing his astonishment, Zhongxian took a deep breath and willed, flaws. The other party was simply too weird. He would have to rely on the Library of Heaven's Path in order to overcome the current situation. Wang. The Library of Heaven's Path trembled, but no book appeared. What? Zhongxian's body stiffened. The fact that no book was compiled in the Library of Heaven's Path meant that the other party had either reached a level that surpassed the heavens of the azure, or they were using some kind of technique that concealed them from the heavens. Is it the effect of this folded space? Zhongxian thought. He had encountered such situations in the master-teacher continent as well, and there was a good chance that the other party was using a similar method. With the heavens sealed off, the Library of Heaven's Path would not be able to work its wonders. But this then led to another question: why would the other party do so? Could it be that they knew about his Library of Heaven's Path as well, and that was why they had chosen to set up such a trap against him? That should be impossible. Most likely, they are just afraid of the means of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. After all, those elders are bound to be keeping an eye on me in case I run into any danger, so they might be using this to stall for time. He was certain that there was no one in the world other than Luo Ruoxin who knew about the Library of Heaven's Path, so that could not possibly be the reason. Most likely, it was just to ward off the experts of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. I heard that you specialize in the way of the sword. Won't you show me how powerful your swordsmanship is? While Zhongxian's mind was still trying to make sense of the situation, the black-robed expert before him launched a follow-up attack with a flick of his finger. Woo-woo-oo-woo. 5 surges of sword chi shot forth from his 5 fingers, and they bolted toward Zhongxian with frightening speed. Zhongxian immediately pushed his feet against the ground and flitted to the side. Heaven's Path movement art. But despite his swift evasive maneuver, the 5 surges of sword chi reacted equally fast. No matter where he maneuvered himself to, the 5 surges of sword chi would swiftly return to his trail. He was unable to get away at all. His moves are truly impressive, Zhongxian murmured. He knew that he had met the real deal this time around. There was no way the other party could have controlled his sword chi manually to catch up with his Heaven's Path movement art. What the other party had done instead was lock his sword chi onto him through his sword intent. As such, no matter where he ran off to, the sword chi would simply follow him. Zhongxian was also capable of this move, but it was an advanced move that he would have to rely on his god's sword intent to pull off. He would have never thought that the other party would be this powerful. The Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was known to be the place where the strongest sword practitioners resided, but not even the strongest core disciples whom he had seen in the core disciples' ethereal hall yesterday would be capable of pulling this feat off. This really got Zhongxian thinking. Just what was the background of the people standing before him? Why would they want to kill him? A thought swiftly arose in his head, and he widened his eyes in astonishment. Are you from the Hall of Gods? Sect leader Han Zhenqiu had told him that he must make sure to keep his true identity a secret, or else the Hall of Gods might set their eyes on him and make an attempt on his life. Back then, he had thought that with how low profile he was, it would be a long time before trouble came knocking on his door. But in less than a day, the enemies had already tracked him down. It seemed like he might have been taking the Hall of Gods too lightly. Just the fact that they were able to confirm his identity and track him down within a single day meant that their means far exceeded his imagination. Who? Instead of answering Zhongxian's questions, the black-robed expert flicked his fingers once more and sent several more surges of sword chi on Zhongxian's pursuit. These few surges of sword chi swiftly merged together with the earlier ones, causing their strength and speed to be enhanced significantly. At this rate, it seemed like they were going to catch up with him and impale his body. Break. Zhongxian hurriedly channeled his zhenqi within the tip of his finger and shot it out at the sword chi behind him. The two surges collided with one another with a resounding explosion. I can't wait any longer, Zhongxian thought as he took the opportunity to create some distance between him and his opponent. In order to dodge the other party's sword chi, he had to forcefully compress his zhenqi to the extremities and expel it swiftly. Just carrying out this move had inflicted minor internal injuries within him. On the other hand, his opponent seemed to be in a leisurely state, clearly having yet to be pushed to his limits. This made Zhongxian realize that he would surely die at this rate. Thus, he took a deep breath and swallowed a superior immortal pill. Gu. A tremendous amount of energy immediately poured into his body. What? Noticing Zhongxian's peculiar actions, the black-robed expert was stunned for a moment. He could feel Zhongxian's zhenqi swiftly rising to a new peak before abruptly bursting apart. Boom! Thunderous rumbling echoed from Zhongxian's body as his cultivation began surging upward. His cultivation was already at the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm, but usually, some preparations would be required before pushing for a breakthrough. However, given how critical the situation was, he decided to force his way through. Pushing a breakthrough on the spot. Interesting. The black-robed expert was surprised, but he was not too shocked by the matter. Without wasting any time, he proceeded on to launch another new wave of attacks. If he could not even kill a pseudo-immortal realm lad, there was no way his master would assign any other missions to him in the future. Hong Long. The offense this time around was clearly much stronger than before. Even without a weapon in hand, the black-robed expert's sword chi was incredibly sharp and swift. In just a few moments, it was already right before Zhongxian. Who? On the other hand, Zhongxian stood motionlessly on the spot as he exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. His breakthrough to the true immortal realm had raised his fighting prowess significantly. To make an analogy, the energy a pseudo-immortal wielded was similar to snow. As long as it piled up, it would be able to crush anything beneath it. But upon reaching true immortal realm, the snow would have melted to form a flowing river. While it was lacking in decisive might, it made up for it through its relentless nature. Even the toughest of materials would give way under this relentless torrent. Furthermore, this breakthrough did not just bring about a qualitative enhancement in his zhenqi. His soul and physical body had been tempered as well, allowing him to think faster and react swifter. Just as the sword chi launched by the black-robed expert was about to pierce through his chest, Zhongxian lightly tilted his body and easily dodged the attack. After which, he quickly launched a counterattack with a flick of his finger. Voila! Sword chi of roughly the width of a human's arm darted straight toward the black-robed expert. It was the same move as earlier, but the might and speed it harnessed were much stronger than before. Humph! The black-robed expert harumphed coldly as he lifted his palm and struck at the incoming sword chi. A massive dust storm rose in the air, obscuring one's sight. Under the sheer might of the palm strike, the incoming sword chi dissipated inch after inch. Even though Zhongxian had managed to advance his cultivation to true immortal, his strength as a lesser true immortal was still lacking to the black-robed expert's heavenly true immortal. It's about time to end the battle. Having finished testing the limits of Zhongxian's strength, the edges of the black-robed expert's lips curled up into a cold sneer as he charged right through the dust storm to launch the decisive move to conclude the battle. But all of a sudden, goosebumps rose all over his body as warning bells rang desperately in his mind. His instincts were screaming at him that he was in grave danger. He quickly looked upward, and only then did he realize that a real sword was concealed within the earlier burst of sword chi, and at that very moment, it was pointed right in front of his chest. Chapter 1999. Swallow their swords. Fully trusting his instincts, the black-robed expert immediately retreated with a pale face. He did not think that the earlier attack would only be a feint. The true threat was hidden amid the sword chi. It's a high immortal tier sword. The black-robed expert was stunned. Weapons of such a tier were known to be incredibly prideful, so why would this sword submit to a mere pseudo-immortal? This was impossible. However, this was not the time for his attention to be wandering away. He quickly turned around and backed away. Where do you think you're going? Driving the god's sword intent within his body, the Tongshang sword blurred into an afterimage, almost as if a drifting cloud that moved without leaving behind any traces. Puha! Fresh blood spurted into the air as the black-robed expert cried out. His hand had been severed. However, Zhongxian did not show the slightest hint of relief despite having severed the other party's hand. Instead, the look on his face turned even more livid. He had brought out the Tongshang sword and used the god's sword intent, so he thought that he would be able to defeat the other party in a single strike. Yet, all that he had managed to do was sever one of the other party's limbs. This was not looking very good at all. You are actually able to harm me? The black-robed expert looked at his severed hand on the ground with an incredulous expression. Gradually, his face warped into savagery, and with a furious roar, he whipped out a sword. The only reason he had not used a weapon all that time was because he had thought that the other party was unworthy of him going so far. However, he realized that he might lose his life here if he continued underestimating his enemy. Voila! As soon as the sword appeared, the black-robed man slashed it down forcefully, producing a wheezing sound in the air. A golden burst of sword chi spanning several zhong surged down on Zhongxian. This is a high immortal tier weapon. Zhongxian widened his eyes in surprise as he quickly backed away. He knew just how arrogant high immortal tier weapons could be. The Tongshang sword that he was holding was one perfect example. If not for the means that he possessed, he would have had difficulty trying to tame it. Yet, the other party, despite being at the heavenly true immortal realm, was actually able to succeed. This was truly terrifying. Astonished, Zhongxian took out 2 superior immortal pills and swallowed them. Even though his cultivation had reached the lesser true immortal realm, he was still unable to seize a decisive advantage over the black-robed expert. Furthermore, there were 3 more powerful opponents lying in wait behind. While dodging the offense of the black-robed expert, he made sure to keep a lookout for the movements of the other 3, fearing that they would sneak an assault on him. However, those 3 remained completely motionless, impassive to the plight of their comrade at all. He had no idea what those 3 were up to, but it was good news that they were not moving just yet. At the very least, this meant that he still stood a chance. Heaving a sigh of relief, Zhongxian dodged the golden outburst of sword chi through his nimble movements while counterattacking with his own surges of sword chi. Dang 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 dang. As the 2 swords clashed with one another, sonic booms echoed deafeningly in the air. The combined might of Zhongxian's zhunqi, physical body, and soul was so great that it felt like it could almost smash a mountain into bits, but somehow, every strike that he launched was easily deflected by the other party. It was as if the black-robed expert wielded boundless strength. No matter what was thrown at him, he would be able to take it without suffering any damage. Zhong Xian's face grew more and more livid. He had cultivated the Heaven's Path divine art right from the start, which had given him extremely strong foundations. Furthermore, he had been through the Saint Ascension ordeal and undergone multiple ancient sage ordeals. Typically speaking, his strength should have been able to easily match opponents whose cultivation was far higher than his. Yet, this black-robed expert was actually fighting him on an equal footing. Not even the number one core disciple, He Jingxian, would be able to do this. In fact, even sect leader Han Zhenqiu might not be able to match this black-robed expert's strength when his cultivation was suppressed to the heavenly true immortal realm. Other than the Hall of Gods, there was probably no other organization in the Azure that had such powerful expert. At this rate, I might really die here, Zhong Xian thought. Even with plenty of superior immortal pills, he found that he was quickly depleting his supposedly almost endless zhenqi. This made his expression become even darker. Once he depleted his zhenqi, even escaping would become impossible for him. This was the very first time in a long while that he had felt so cornered. He had grown so used to being much stronger than his counterparts that he had severely underestimated the threats that lurked in the Azure. I can't drag out this fight any longer. I need to find the opening in this folded space and find a way to escape, Zhong Xian thought. He had no idea why the other three were not making a move, but one of them was a heavenly high immortal. If even a heavenly true immortal was able to push him this far, he would surely die once the heavenly high immortal made his move. No matter what, he had to get out of there. The fact that the enemies had resorted to pulling him into a folded space meant that they were wary of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Most likely, the sect might have sent experts to follow him. He would be in a much safer position if he could regroup with them. Even if that was not the case, with the mystical disguise amulet that Luo Ruoxin had given him, he was confident that he would be able to blend into the crowd and get away. Just that the Library of Heaven's Path could not be used there, which complicated things a little. Eye of Insight. Zhong Xian began scanning his surroundings carefully, but nothing was coming to him at all. He was starting to get a little desperate. Given how prepared the other party was, bringing him into a folded space in order to deal with him, there was no way they would allow him to break out of there easily. The structure of the space in the Azure is much more stable than that of the Master-Teacher continent, but the fundamental theories must be the same, Zhong Xian thought as he anxiously ran through everything that he knew about space in his mind. Focusing his eye of insight on the structure of the space once more, he quickly deconstructed it with his eyes, turning it back into its most fundamental form. That place. It seems to be a little brittle. It did not take long for him to identify a certain spot that was visibly different from the others. Thus, with a sudden outburst of strength, he launched a series of tenacious attacks that forced the black-robed expert to retreat continuously. Then, when he finally got close to this brittle spot, he abruptly redirected the trajectory of his sword to strike it with all his might. Ding! A resounding buzz reminiscent of a metallic clang echoed loudly in the air. Zhong Xian felt a tremendous rebound gushing from the Tongzhang sword back toward his arm, forcing him to swiftly retreat several steps in order to ward off the force. Who? The area that he had just struck warped a little, and another figure appeared in the folded space. Elder Chou Hua. Zhong Xian widened his eyes. It was none other than Elder Chou Hua, the first elder of the core disciple sector whom he had wrecked back at the Elder Council. He had been following Zhong Xian, protecting him from the shadows. When these black-robed figures struck, he had noticed it right away and immediately rushed over, but the folded space had closed before he could make his way in. He had tried many ways to breach the folded space, but despite being a heavenly high immortal, he had been unable to find a way in. He felt as if there were people reinforcing the folded space from within, rendering all his attempts futile. It was only when Zhong Xian struck the opening of the folded space that he managed to find an opportunity to dash in. After entering the space, he immediately cast a sweeping gaze across the area, and when he saw that Zhong Xian was still unharmed, he heaved a huge sigh of relief and said, "It's great that you're fine," following which, He took his stance in front of Zhongxian and looked at the 4 black-robed figures in front coldly. As high immortal and true immortals of the Hall of Gods, aren't you ashamed for ganging up on a mere pseudo-immortal? Elder Cho Hua scoffed disdainfully. It took a mere glance for him to identify the background of the assailants. Kill him, and make sure that nothing gets leaked out, the black-robed heavenly high immortal instructed. Yes. The other 2 true immortals standing behind him clasped their fists and bowed slightly in acknowledgement of the command. Who? Without any hesitation, they whipped out their swords and charged forth. Astonishingly, their swords were also at high immortal tier as well. One of them moved left, and the other moved right. They swiftly flanked Elder Cho Hua and engaged him from both directions. Ding 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 ding, just like that, the 3 of them began a fight of their own. Seeing this sight, Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. To his astonishment, the other 2 black-robed heavenly true immortal experts were actually able to fight the heavenly high immortal realm Elder Cho Hua as equals. Not only that, they seemed to be gradually gaining an edge over Elder Cho Hua. The difference in the strength between a true immortal and a high immortal was equivalent to that between a great sage and an ancient sage. The 2 existences were simply so far apart from one another that they could not be compared with one another. A lesser high immortal could easily subdue a dozen heavenly true immortals. As such, it was hard to believe that 2 heavenly true immortals were able to equal a heavenly high immortal like Elder Cho Hua in a fight. Even when he was witnessing it with his own eyes, Zhongxian could still hardly believe that this was really happening. However, the situation did not grant him the luxury to be focused on another person's fight. The black-robed expert whose hand he had just severed had just begun executing a set of consecutive fatal attacks against him, forcing him to back away again and again. Despite incurring severe injuries, it did not seem like the fighting prowess of the black-robed expert had reduced in the least. In fact, it seemed to have stimulated something deep within him, granting him boundless strength. He threw out slash after slash with frenzied might, reminiscent of a crazed berserker on a battlefield. Dongshu gored, don't feigning death. Don't you see what's going on here? Zhongxian bellowed internally. Yeah, I do. So? The Dongshu gourd replied lazily as it swam around Zhongxian's dantian. So? Aren't you able to eat swords? Go and swallow the swords of those B** stars for me. Zhongxian roared. It was at this moment that he suddenly recalled that the Dongshu gourd had swallowed the Tongshang sword once. If it could just swallow the sword of the black-robed expert, he should be able to turn the tables. Sure, the Dongshu gourd replied lazily. Remember your words. Don't expect me to spit it out later, alright? That's right, hurry up. Wait, let me double-check first. You want me to eat the swords of all of those B** stars, right? Cut the CR*P and hurry up. Zhongxian felt like his blood pressure was going to hit the roof at this rate. How in the world could someone be so annoying? If not for the fact that he was unable to do so, he would have hacked the Dongshu gourd into pieces with an axe by now. Yes. Receiving Zhongxian's permission, the Dongshu gourd looked at the swords before it with an excited gleam on its exterior before it began to make its move. I'll never forgive you for daring to humiliate me. Pay for your insolence with your life. While Zhongxian was communicating with the Dongshu gourd, the black-robed expert realized that his mind was wandering, and he gnashed his teeth so tightly that some bits of them chipped off. With a furious roar, he raised his sword and hacked it down with stupendous might. His swordsmanship was sharp and aggressive. Every single strike came from a difficult trajectory, and it was aimed at a vital. Even though it was very different from the Heaven's Path sword art, its might could not be underestimated. Most likely, it was a unique sword art of the Hall of Gods. But halfway through his slash, there was a blur, and all of a sudden, he felt an empty feeling in his arms. Just like magic, the sword in his grasp vanished without a trace. The sudden change in weight caused the black-robed expert to stagger forward slightly, but he immediately regained his balance and backed away. He had spent a tremendous amount of effort to tame this high immortal tier sword, and it had definitely been in his hand a moment ago. Where in the world could it have disappeared to? With widened eyes, he looked around, but his sword was nowhere to be seen. What the hell? Can anyone tell me what just happened? Where is my sword? Where is my sword? You scoundrel. What kind of sorcery did you play on me? Damn it. You are courting death. While the black-robed expert was still searching for his sword, he suddenly heard two bellows not too far away. Turning his gaze over, he saw that the swords of his other two heavenly true immortal comrades had vanished as well. Right after, a flabbergasted voice echoed in the air. It isn't me. My sword has disappeared, too. The sword in Elder Cho Hua's hand had disappeared into thin air as well. 1 jong equals 3. 33 m. Chapter 2000. Bet. Zhongxian nearly fainted from anger. He knew that the Dongshu gourd was unreliable, but he had never thought that it would actually be such a blithering idiot. I told you to devour the swords of those B*****. Why did you swallow Elder Cho Hua's sword too? He's a sword practitioner, and his greatest strength lies in his swordsmanship. How do you expect him to fight his opponents without a sword? Peng 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 peng. Just as this thought formulated in his mind, the two black-robed heavenly true immortals began clashing with Elder Cho Hua once more. Without a sword in his hand, Elder Cho Hua's fighting prowess was severely affected. Under the assault of those two, he was slowly falling into a disadvantageous position. I need to hurry up and defeat this one so that I can back Elder Cho Hua, Zhongxian thought. Knowing that he was pressed for time, he decided to ignore the Dongshu gourd for the time being and drove the Tongshang sword toward the black-robed expert before him. Deprived of his sword, the black-robed expert's fighting prowess was clearly crippled. After several blows, a few holes had already been punctured through his body. While attacking the black-robed expert, Zhongxian kept an eye out on the heavenly high immortal expert, but the latter did not seem to be intending to offer his help at all. Heaving a sigh of relief, he intensified his offense. Puha! After 3 moves, the Tongshang sword pierced right through the black-robed expert's forehead. Zhongxian forcefully twisted the sword sideward. Peng! The black-robed expert's head immediately burst apart, causing him to die on the spot. Meanwhile, the heavenly high immortal remained unfazed, as if everything that was going on was none of his business at all. Those from the Hall of Gods have always been cold-hearted. Elder Cho Hua's voice suddenly sounded in Zhongxian's ears. All they are concerned with is the accomplishment of their mission. In contrast, the fate of their comrades means nothing to them. Nodding in realization, Zhongxian quickly charged toward the closest heavenly true immortal expert to alleviate Elder Cho Hua of his burden. With his recent breakthrough to lesser true immortal realm and the Tongshang sword, his true fighting prowess was on par with an average high immortal. In a few moments, the heavenly true immortal expert had his hands full dealing with him. As the burden on him alleviated, Elder Cho Hua swiftly knocked back the remaining heavenly true immortal expert with a strike of his palm before checking on Zhongxian's condition. Considering how he had difficulties dealing with these two, he was not too sure if Zhongxian would be able to stand his ground against one of them. You have managed to tame the Tongshang sword? That was a sword that the sect leader had just given Zhongxian in the Elder Council, and the latter had run over to Wuhai City right after the bestowment. After arriving in Wuhai City, he had gone to explore the ethereal hall, and shortly after, he had gone to visit the Wuhai market to appraise some artifact. Despite his busyness, how in the world did he manage to find time to tame the Tongshang sword? Furthermore, he had managed to achieve swordman union with it, which meant that the Tongshang sword had fully acknowledged him. When did it become so easy to tame a high immortal tier sword? If that was the case, why in the world did he go through so much in order to tame that sword of his? Putting aside the fact that he had expended several liters of his blood, he had squandered a good chunk of his fortune for it as well. Just thinking about all he had spent on his sword disappearing with a poof, Elder Cho Hua felt his heart spasming painfully. He glared at the heavenly true immortal expert before him with fury burning in his eyes. The culprit could not be anyone other than these two fellows. Otherwise, why would his sword suddenly disappear in the midst of battle? You be *****. Return my sword. Peng 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 peng. In a fit of rage, Elder Cho Hua launched devastating palm strikes one after another on his opponent. He was a heavenly high immortal, one of the most powerful existences on the Azure. His full strength caused the folded space to tremor endlessly, as if the place would collapse very soon. Pu. Struck several times squarely by Elder Cho Hua's palm strikes, the heavenly true immortal expert facing him felt so indignant that he could vomit blood. Are you sick in the head? I'm not the one who took your sword. Even if I did take your sword, why would my sword disappear as well? You scoundrel, do you think that you'll get away scot-free after stealing my baby? Return my sword right now. Elder Cho Hua bellowed like a madman. I said that I didn't take it. You are the one who should return my sword, the heavenly true immortal expert shouted back indignantly. Infuriated, he was just about to pit his life against Elder Cho Hua when he suddenly felt a stabbing pain in the aperture located in his lower body. He turned around, only to see Zhong Xian, who should have been fighting with his comrade, standing behind him all of a sudden. Naturally, it went without saying that the stabbing pain came from the young man's sword too. Fresh blood spurted out from his lower aperture. My bad. I accidentally penetrated you with my sword, Zhong Xian replied with an apologetic look as he pulled out his sword forcefully and bolted away to attack his comrade. You! The heavenly high immortal expert was infuriated, but there was a heavenly high immortal expert standing right in front of him. He knew that this was an opponent he had to focus all his attention into dealing with, so he could only let the young man get away for the time being. He dashed with incredible speed to strike down Elder Cho Hua, but barely after making 2 moves, he suddenly felt another stabbing pain in his alimentary canal. Turning his head around, once again, it was an apologetic Zhong Xian. Great heavens, I have made a mistake again. Made a mistake your head, the heavenly high immortal expert bellowed furiously. I'm not even your opponent, so why do you keep coming over to violate me? Made a mistake. Screw that. Would anyone make such a blatant mistake? There's no doubt about it, you must be doing it on purpose. Exploding with fury, the heavenly true immortal was just thinking of putting his opponent aside down to kill Zhong Xian when he suddenly felt a burst of pressure assaulting him. Elder Cho Hua had launched yet another attack on him. A series of consecutive palm strikes rendered him unable to move, and fresh blood spurted from his body. His meridians were jolted from the impact from the strikes, and before he knew it, he was already severely injured. This won't do. At this rate, I'll really die, the heavenly true immortal expert thought grimly. With an awful look on his face, he racked his mind to think of a solution when he suddenly felt another stabbing pain on his bottom. When he turned his head over, it was yet again another apologetic Zhong Xian waving his hand. It's a mistake, a mistake. Mistake your head. Unable to tolerate it anymore, the heavenly true immortal expert completely ignored Elder Cho Hua and dashed right toward Zhong Xian. However, before he could even attack at all, he suddenly felt a surge of sword chi bursting into his body through the latter's blade. Pu. His organs were immediately shattered. With a look of disbelief in his eyes, his corpse fell to the ground. On the other hand, seeing that he had managed to get rid of another one of the heavenly true immortal experts, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. The experts from the Hall of Gods were simply too powerful. Even with his lesser true immortal realm cultivation and the Tongzhang sword, it would still be difficult for him to defeat them within 100 moves. Thus, he could only intentionally lure one away and harass the other one fighting Elder Cho Hua. It had taken him several provocations before he managed to enrage the other party to reveal an opening, which he had then exploited to subdue the other party in an instant. With this, the single remaining heavenly true immortal was a walk in the park. Collaborating with Elder Cho Hua, they managed to defeat him with ease. Surprisingly, even as they killed the 3 heavenly true immortal experts, the black-robed heavenly high immortal expert from the Hall of Gods showed no signs of interfering at all. Instead, he smiled lightly and said, "You are indeed an extraordinary individual. Within such a short period of time, you were able to formulate a plan and slay 3 members from the Hall of Gods. It's no wonder the leader wants us to capture you alive." Slowly, the heavenly high immortal expert began making his way toward Zhong Xian. "Capture me alive?" Zhong Xian frowned. He had been wondering why those black-robed figures did not whip out their weapons right from the start. It turned out that they were afraid of accidentally going too far and killing him, but eventually, they had realized that it was impossible for them to win without a weapon in hand. Nevertheless, even when forced into a corner, they did not resort to exploding their cultivation or anything of the sort. Clearly, they were afraid of going too far. "That's right," the heavenly high immortal expert replied with a leisurely voice. "It was their test to capture you alive, and I thought that they should be able to do so without my aid. I must say that your strength has exceeded my expectations. Since that's the case, you shall have the honor of facing me. You'll have to get past me if you wish to make a move on him." Elder Cho Hua stepped forward and harumphed. Even though he did not have a sword in hand, the sword intent shrouding his body was so great that it seemed as if it would pierce through the folded space. "I have long heard that the experts of the Hall of Gods are unrivaled among their counterparts, and I have been wanting to verify those rumors for a while." "You!" The heavenly high immortal expert shook his head and chuckled, as if mocking a fool who did not know his place. He flicked his finger lightly. Pang! Elder Cho Hua's body rose into the air helplessly as fresh blood spurted from his mouth. No matter what he did, he was unable to regain control of his body. In that instant, his eyes were filled with horror. When he realized that those two heavenly true immortals were able to fight with him on equal grounds, he had realized that this lesser true immortal would definitely be a formidable foe. However, he did not think that the latter would be so powerful. To seal off the energy in his body with a single move, leaving no room for him to retaliate at all. "It doesn't seem like you are qualified at all," the heavenly high immortal remarked coldly. From the moment he made a move to the moment he finished his words, there was actually no pause at all. In other words, despite being one of the strongest elders of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, he did not even last a breath before he was helplessly pinned in the air. It was no wonder he did not make a move even when the three heavenly true immortal experts were being killed earlier. Given his strength, there was indeed no need for him to work together with others. While holding Elder Cho Hua firmly in place with a single finger, the heavenly high immortal expert turned to Zhongxian and calmly asked, "Are you going to come with me, or are you waiting for me to make a move?" Given his level of strength, there was no need for him to resort to vicious words. There was nothing that spoke louder than absolute strength. Instead of answering the other party's question, Zhongxian looked at him intently and asked, "Why does your leader wish to capture me alive? Is it because I have comprehended the god's sword intent?" "That's not something you need to know," the heavenly high immortal replied impassively. "I guess there's no way you would reveal anything." Zhongxian shook his head and sighed. "To be honest, you are probably the strongest person I have met in the Azure side from sect leader Han. However, you aren't a match for me. All it takes is a single thought for me to obliterate you." "I'm not a match for you." The heavenly high immortal nearly burst out laughing. "Would you like to give it a try?" There was no denying that the young man was indeed very powerful. In fact, he probably could have triumphed over all warriors that were of the same cultivation realm as him from their Hall of Gods easily. Unfortunately, the young man's cultivation was simply too weak. They were not on the same level at all. Yet, to claim that he was not a match for him. What a joke. The trapped Elder Cho Hua was also rendered speechless by Zhongxian's ridiculous words. "Bro, this is a life-and-death situation. Can you stop bragging and get serious? If it was possible to defeat him by bragging, I would have long done so. Don't you see how I'm completely pinned down here before I could even finish my bragging? Indeed. If you don't believe me, shall we make a bet then?" Zhongxian asked calmly. Chuckling softly, the heavenly high immortal expert's interest seemed to have been piqued. Placing his hands behind his back, he asked, "What kind of bet do you intend to propose?" With strength of his level, he was not scared of any schemes that Zhongxian might try. "It's very simple. I want you to stand on the spot and not move at all. If you are able to withstand my attack, I'll leave with you obediently. Otherwise, I guess that will be the end of you then," Zhongxian replied. "You are challenging me to withstand your attack?" The heavenly high immortal expert's eyebrows shot up. "Do you have a semi-divinity weapon with you?" The fact that the other party dared make such a bet showed that he had some trump card up his sleeves. Most likely, it would be a semi-divinity weapon. However, even with a semi-divinity weapon in hand, there was no way he could be defeated that easily. It isn't a weapon but a book. If you can withstand the weight of my book, I'll do whatever you tell me to. Otherwise, don't blame me for not going easy on you, Zhongxian replied. A book? The heavenly high immortal expert burst into laughter. You must be joking. Do you think a book can kill me? Chapter 2001 Killing a Heavenly High Immortal. Make a bet with me, and we shall see, Zhongxian said. Well, even if you refuse my bet and take me away forcefully, there's nothing I can do. It's just that I find it ludicrous how a heavenly high immortal from the Hall of Gods would actually fear a mere lesser true immortal cultivator like me. From the looks of it, it seems like the Hall of Gods isn't anything impressive. Lesser true immortal realm? Hearing those words, the trapped elder Cho immediately took a closer look, and it was only then that he noticed the change in Zhongxian's cultivation. This stunned him. The battle earlier had placed him in such a dangerous position that he did not have the luxury of allowing his mind to wander at all. He never would have thought that Zhongxian would manage to achieve a breakthrough so quickly after leaving the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. If the information that they had received was true, Zhongxian should only have been at Dimension Shatter Realm primary stage when he first entered the sect, but in slightly more than a day, his cultivation had risen all the way up to lesser true immortal. But bro, no matter how I look at you, you seem to be interested in nothing but causing trouble. After tumbling from one mess into another, where in the world did you find the time to cultivate? Does your cultivation rise just by you breathing? More importantly, what do you mean by killing the other party with a book? Are you serious about this? Having lived for over 200 years, Elder Cho had read several 100,000 books, but he had never seen a single book that could kill a person. There's no use provoking me, the black-robed heavenly high immortal expert replied nonchalantly. I know that someone as powerful as you won't fall for my provocation, but you shouldn't look down on my determination either. If you don't agree to my terms, I'd rather end my own life than go with you. Zhongxian replied. End your own life? The heavenly high immortal expert burst into laughter. Do you honestly think that you will have an opportunity to do so before me? You seem to be blinded by your own arrogance, Zhongxian replied with composed smile. Didn't those high immortal tier swords disappear before you knew it earlier? Those words made the heavenly high immortal expert's eyes narrow in shock. Indeed. With his strength, there was no need for him to waste his words with Zhongxian at all. He could have easily captured Zhongxian and dragged him over of the Hall of Gods, but the reason he had yet to make a move thus far was because those high immortal tier swords had disappeared way too bizarrely. Even though he had been observing the scene the whole time, he was still unable to make sense out of what had happened. As such, he had thought that there might be some stronger power lingering in the area, and he had devoted all of his attention to guarding against it. That was also why he had watched as his subordinates were killed before his eyes without making his move. He feared that if he revealed an opening, that power would devour him in an instant. The heavenly high immortal harumphed coldly. I can make a bet with you, but you are to rely only on your own strength. If anyone intervenes at all, I can't guarantee that I'll keep my end of the bargain. He had gotten a thorough look at the young man's fighting prowess, and no matter what kind of trump card the latter had, it was impossible for the latter to kill him. His only worry was the expert who had made all the swords disappear. As long as that expert did not appear, there would not be any problem at all. Of course, even if their expert did appear, the other party might not necessarily be a match for him. In this space, he was the absolute ruler. Unless one's cultivation had reached semi-divinity realm, no one would stand a chance against him. In fact, he would not worry much even if sect leader Han of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion appeared before him. Fine by me. Zhongxian nodded. What he was going to do was, naturally, use the prowess of the golden page. The reason he had bothered saying so much beforehand was because this folded space was concealed from the heavens, so he had no idea whether that would affect his ability or not. Furthermore, considering how powerful the heavenly high immortal expert was, it was likely that he had many life preservation means. If he noticed the tremendous might of the golden page beforehand and made his escape before the golden page even came close, he might have ended up wasting the golden page for nothing. That could have ended in a catastrophe, especially since he only had a single golden page with him at the moment. He only had one shot, so he had to do everything he could in order to increase his chances of success. In any case, if this promise could delay the other party's movements by even a split second, it would still be worth the effort to do so. Fine, I'll stand here. Let me see what kind of means you have. The black-robed heavenly high immortal expert stood on the spot as he looked at Zhongxian nonchalantly. Despite not moving in the least, in truth, he was driving his zhenqi furiously in order to defend against anything that came his way. He was convinced that Zhongxian was setting this up in order to distract him, and he was prepared to counterattack as soon as the hidden expert made his move. Here it comes then. With a thought, Zhongxian used the golden page that had formed earlier when he formally accepted Bai Wanqing as his direct disciple. The Book of Heaven's Path immediately shot out from his glabella and appeared above the black-robed heavenly high immortal expert in an instant. It's really a book. The heavenly high immortal expert was slightly taken aback. He had honestly thought that it was just something ludicrous the other party had come up with on the spot in order to throw him off, but who could have known that it would actually be a real book? He took a closer look at the book above him, wanting to determine what kind of artifact it was. Yet, to his astonishment, even with his eye of discernment, he was unable to see through its true nature. He could not feel any energy pulsating from the book, making it seem as if it was an ordinary item. Yet, for some reason, he felt deeply pressured by its presence. It felt like he was standing before an inviolable being that he could not oppose no matter how he struggled. This is bad, I have fallen for that fellow's trap. This isn't a distraction but the real killing move. The heavenly high immortal expert widened his eyes in realization. He could not tell whether the book was a semi-divinity artifact or not, but one thing was for sure, it was not weak at all. If the book smashed down on him, even with his current strength, he was not confident that he would be able to withstand it. Break. Without any hesitation, the heavenly high immortal whipped out a sword and charged right toward Zhongxian. No matter what, he had to launch a preemptive move in order to protect himself. Sila. Due to his tremendous strength, several lacerations immediately appeared around the originally stable space. It felt like the entire folded space was starting to collapse. Crush him. Zhongxian willed. Who? The Book of Heaven's Path swiftly descended from the sky. Catcher. It fell squarely on the black-robed heavenly high immortal expert's head, causing it to burst apart. Putong. His corpse fell limply to the ground. Elder Cho Hua immediately felt the force binding his body loosening, allowing him to move once more. However, the sight that had appeared before him shocked him beyond words. His face was completely pale, and his body simply trembled on the spot. It would be no exaggeration to say that the heavenly high immortal expert wielded strength comparable to even their sect leader, but he had been killed by a single book. It was a decisive kill, such that the other party could not even retaliate at all. Elder Cho Hua's eyes slowly fell on Zhongxian once more, but this time, his gaze was filled with deference. Previously, he had only thought of Zhongxian as a junior, but at that very moment, the latter had already become someone equivalent to appear to him. He silently swore to himself that he would never cross the terrifying young man before him. It succeeded. On the other hand, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that the Book of Heaven's Path had successfully rid him of his enemy. He had worried that the golden page would not work properly after all. The last time he used it was on a mere dimension shatter realm cultivator, so he had spent a lot of time trying to negotiate favorable terms that would raise its chances of success. But from the looks of it, there was no need to have done so at all. The golden page was just as formidable as before. No matter how powerful the enemy was, he would slay the other party with a single Book of Heaven's Path. Zhongxian quickly flitted up to the deceased heavenly high immortal's side and flicked his wrist. Who? The corpse was stowed into his storage ring. Following which, he did the same for the other three heavenly true immortal experts. Experts of their tier could be said to be walking treasure troves. As long as he could make use of them properly, he would be able to significantly increase the number of trump cards he had. He did not think much of the matter in the past, but now that he had witnessed the tremendous strength wielded by those of the Hall of Gods, he knew that he had to be careful or else he might really lose his life. Catcher. With the death of the heavenly high immortal expert, There was no longer anyone to maintain the folded space. As a result, it swiftly collapsed. The next moment, the bustling commotion of a lively street sounded in Zhong Xian's ears. When he looked around him, he realized that he had returned to the street just outside the market. Elder Cho Hua was standing nearby with a dazed look on his face. After recovering from the earlier shock, Elder Cho Hua anxiously urged, "Elder Zhong, let's return to the sect." That was simply too dangerous. He had always taken pride in his own strength, but when he was faced with the earlier black-robed figure, he had tasted the helplessness of despair. Even though the two of them were both heavenly high immortals, an unimaginable gap stood in between the two of them. Zhong Xian nodded in response to those words. He did not have any golden pages left, so it was important for him to take caution. If he encountered any experts of the same caliber as the black-robed figure from earlier, he might just meet his end. Receiving Zhong Xian's approval, Elder Cho Hua swiftly wrapped Zhong Xian in his zhenqi, and the two of them quickly made their way toward the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. There was no guarantee when the Hall of Gods would send more people after them, so it was best for them to leave as soon as possible. As for Bai Wanqing, she should be safe since she was not the target of the Hall of Gods. They could always inform her of what had happened through a communication jade token afterward. Elder Cho Hua, I recall that you have mentioned that those of the Hall of Gods have always been cold-natured. What does that mean? Zhong Xian popped a couple superior immortal pills into his mouth as he spoke. I don't really know too much about the Hall of Gods myself, but I once heard sect leader Han mentioning that they select their members in the same way GU is bred. Those who eventually join their ranks are the survivors who have gone through countless battles and undergone the cleansing of blood time and time again. The process killed all their emotions, and the only thing that remains in their minds is the will to accomplish whatever mission they are entrusted with. Aside from that, the concepts of camaraderie and so on don't mean a thing to them, Elder Cho Hua replied. The Hall of Gods was an incredibly elusive existence on the Forsaken Continent, and this was actually the first time that he had met the members of the Hall of Gods. He did not think much of them when he first heard those stories, but only upon encountering them in person did he realize just what kind of monsters the Hall of Gods was filled with. Take the heavenly true immortal whom Zhong Xian had stabbed in the rear multiple times earlier. In truth, Zhong Xian had not been fooling around when he did it back then. The attack was definitely fatal, but the heavenly true immortal, despite being caught off guard, had been able to maneuver himself at the last moment to reduce the damage as much as possible. Not only so, his fighting prowess seemed to only grow as he sustained more and more injuries, as if it was impossible to wear him down. The same went for the one whose arm Zhong Xian had severed. Losing an arm seemed to have only triggered his true fighting potential. Only those who had gone through the most hellish of circumstances could possibly display such frightening tenacity in a battle. Did the Hall of Gods make a move because I have comprehended the gods' sword intent and feared that my growth would pose a threat to their authority? Zhong Xian was a little confused by the situation. When he first heard of the Hall of Gods, he had thought that the latter was a lofty organization that refused to involve itself with mortal affairs unless a person overstepped their bounds and challenged the gods. However, to dispatch such powerful experts to take his life as soon as they learned of his existence, was that not way beneath their standing? Another detail that he noticed was that the black-robed figures were instructed to take him back alive, and they seemed to be deeply fearful of accidentally taking his life. This did not make sense at all. If their goal was just to get rid of a potential threat, would they not have been much better off killing him on the spot? I'm afraid that I don't really know, but I believe that to be the primary reason. Otherwise, Sect leader Han wouldn't have sent me to protect you around the clock, Elder Cho Hua replied. Those who are aware that I'm the one who has comprehended the god's sword intent should only be limited to those among the Elder Council, Zhong Xian murmured with a deep frown. How did the Hall of Gods know that it's me? Furthermore, given by how quickly they acted, it seems like they were aware that I was in Wuhai City as well. This was indeed something that was worth thinking over. He had checked the background of those present in the Elder Council with the Library of Heaven's Path, and they were definitely trustworthy. It was also in the spur of a moment that he had decided to head to the Wuhai City, and he did not give any indications beforehand. Unless he could figure out the truth behind this matter, he would not be able to rest easy. Let's discuss it with sect leader Han. He might have some ideas in mind. Elder Cho Hua was also unable to figure out the answers to those questions, so he could only reply with a shake of his head. Bai Wanqing should still be cultivating in the silent chamber in the ethereal hall. I'll have to trouble you to inform her that I have headed back to the sect, Zhongxian said as he swallowed another 2 superior immortal pills. Elder Cho Hua replied with a nod before hastening his speed. 10 minutes later, they were back at the Elder Council once more. You mentioned that the Hall of Gods has already sent assassins after Elder Zhongxian. Hearing Elder Cho Hua's report, Han Jianqiu's face twisted in shock. That's right, Elder Cho Hua replied. They dispatched a heavenly high immortal and 3 heavenly true immortals. A heavenly high immortal and 3 heavenly true immortals? Han Jianqiu recoiled in horror. He looked at the 2 of them with a look of disbelief. Given that powerful line-up, how did the 2 of you manage to escape from them? It's truly an embarrassment to say this, but I wasn't of much help at all. It was Elder Zhongxian who pushed for a breakthrough to the lesser true immortal realm at that critical moment, and with the Tongshang sword you have gifted to him earlier, he slew the 3 heavenly true immortal experts before. In the midst of his explanation, Elder Cho Hua turned to glance at the young man standing beside him, and all of a sudden, his entire body stiffened on the spot. His eyeballs nearly popped out from sheer shock. Why you? When in the world did you reach the heavenly true immortal realm? Chapter 2002 Ascendant Cloud Sword God Formula. What Elder Cho Hua said was the truth. He had followed Zhongxian in order to ensure the latter's safety, but of the 3 heavenly true immortals, the latter had individually killed one, impaled the second one that he was fighting with, and diced the last one into pieces. Even the heavenly high immortal expert had been crushed to death by the latter's book. Thinking back, he really was not of much use. If there was anything that he had done, it was drawing a portion of the mob's aggro. It was also due to the lack of his contribution in the battle that he did not dare complain when the latter took all the drops away as well. He could not help but wonder how the young man was able to advance his cultivation so quickly that he inadvertently shot a glance over, then he found himself shocked once more. Before he knew it, the young man's cultivation had risen from lesser true immortal to heavenly true immortal. I thought that I was still far too weak, so on the way back, I ate a couple of immortal pills and pushed for a couple of breakthroughs, Zhongxian explained. If only he had raised his cultivation to heavenly high immortal realm prior to the assault, he would have been able to deal with those 3 fellows easily even if they had ganged up on him. In view of his safety, he had kept munching on his superior immortal pills while driving his Heaven's Path divine art on the way back. With his accumulation from the earlier battle, it did not take long for him to advance his cultivation all the way to the heavenly true immortal realm. He did not reveal it previously out of fear that there might be spies from the Hall of Gods keeping track of his movements. He would not want to let the enemies know that he was in possession of such a formidable cultivation technique. Now that he was back at the Elder Council though, he felt that he was finally safe once more, so he did not think that there was any need to conceal his cultivation. Who could have thought that he would have ended up frightening Elder Cho Hua? Ate a couple of immortal pills and pushed for a couple of breakthroughs. Hearing how simple Zhongxian made his breakthroughs sound, Han Jianqiu, Elder He Tian, and the others nearly spurted blood on the spot. Just a few hours ago, they had been slightly displeased by how playful Zhongxian was, choosing to sneak out of the sect instead of focusing on advancing his cultivation. Yet, within the 4 short hours that he had been out, he had successfully advanced his cultivation to the heavenly true immortal realm. If what they had heard from Elder Lu Yun was true, the young man's cultivation should only have been at Dimension Shatterer realm primary stage a day ago. What left them feeling even more frenzied was how insignificant the young man was making this accomplishment sound. If the key to achieving breakthroughs was just to devour immortal pills, why isn't anything happening to us? Han Jianqiu suddenly thought of an even more frightening notion, and he hurriedly said, "No, wait a moment. You mentioned that Elder Zhongxian fought off the experts of the Hall of Gods using the Tongshang sword. Are you saying that he has tamed the sword as well?" The Tongshang sword was a treasure that he had acquired a couple of years ago, and he knew just how arrogant it was. Even he would have to put in a great deal of effort if he wanted to tame it, And it was due to how troubling he thought the process would be that he had chosen not to do so. How in the world did Zhongxian manage to tame the sword when his cultivation had only been at the heavenly pseudo-immortal realm back then? More importantly, it only took him a few hours to do so. Yes. He had already tamed the Tongzhang sword when I saw it earlier, Elder Chohua replied with a bitter smile. It had been less than a day since he met Zhongxian, but with each event that happened, he felt like his confidence was swiftly getting shocked out of him. Sighing deeply, Elder Chohua swiftly went through everything that had happened in detail. When the elders heard how the heavenly high immortal expert had been able to subdue Elder Chohua with a mere finger, they were all shocked. Then, when they heard that Zhongxian had crushed the powerful heavenly high immortal expert with a single book, they were all rendered speechless. That book is actually a defensive artifact that my teacher left for me. It can only be used once, so I won't be able to rely on it again in the future, Zhongxian replied. He could not possibly talk about the Library of Heaven's Path, so he could only push everything on to his non-existent teacher. In any case, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had no qualms about their disciples coming under the tutelage of other experts as long as they remained loyal to the sect. Hearing those words, the crowd nodded in realization. All along, they had been intrigued by how a mere 20-year-old young man could possess such powerful cultivation and deep comprehension of swordsmanship. When they heard that he actually had a teacher, it left them feeling greatly relieved. Only under the tutelage of a formidable expert could anyone possibly possess such formidable capabilities at such a young age. It challenged their very common sense to think that the young man could possibly get so powerful on his own. The Hall of Gods has always acted domineeringly, but usually, they can't even be bothered to make a move on anyone beneath the high immortal realm. It's truly unheard of for them to dispatch a heavenly high immortal and 3 heavenly true immortals just to deal with a pseudo-immortal. Not to mention, they even brought out a folded space to seal the surroundings. Han Jianqiu frowned. More importantly, it shouldn't be possible for the Hall of Gods to know of your identity and whereabouts. No one left the Elder Council after your departure, so it's impossible for the information to have leaked out. As lofty as the Hall of Gods is, it isn't omniscient. The Elder Council discussed the matter for quite a while, but they were unable to find a convincing explanation. As a result, they could only put their doubts aside for the time being. If the Hall of Gods dispatches assassins to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as well, will the sect be able to defend against them? Zhongxian finally posed the critical question. This was what he was the most concerned about. If the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was no match for the Hall of Gods, there would be no point in him seeking their protection. He would be much better off wandering the lands so that the Hall of Gods would not be able to find him easily. Han Jianqiu pondered silently for a moment before responding grimly. I don't have an answer to your question, but it's unlikely for what you are thinking of to happen. We are exiles of the firmament, people who have been cast aside by the gods. We fear the gods, but we won't let them walk all over us. It's one thing for the Hall of Gods to attempt to assassinate you in the shadows, but if they make a move on the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, they will risk turning the entire Forsaken Continent against them. The Hall of Gods might be powerful, but even it would suffer great casualties if it made an enemy out of the entire Forsaken Continent. The Hall of Gods might attempt to send assassins into the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion in order to claim your life, but you need not worry about that. Our sect has been reinforced by generations of predecessors, such that even their high immortals won't be able to breach our defenses. Hearing those words, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. It was great to hear that he was still in safe hands for the time being. Thinking back on what had happened, Han Jianqiu's words did make sense. If the Hall of Gods truly did not fear the cultivators of the Forsaken Continent, those black-robed figures would not have bothered pulling him into a folded space before making a move. May I know if there are any high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals in our sect other than those in the Elders' Library? Zhongxian asked. I need as many of them as possible. I still have some doubts concerning that realm, so it would be helpful to have as much reference material as possible. It was still best for him to grasp his own fate in his own hands. He did not feel too comfortable being too reliant on the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion for his own safety, so he knew that he had to become stronger as quickly as possible. If he could just reach the high immortal realm, the Hall of Gods could send as many experts as it wished, and it still would not worry him. Thus, his priority at hand was to raise his cultivation to the high immortal realm. All of the high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals we have are in the Elder's Library, Han Zhenqiu replied with a shake of his head. High immortals were beings who stood at the zenith of the Forsaken Continent. Naturally, there were not that many of them around. Given so, it was inevitable that there were even fewer high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals lying around. The entire sect only has 10 high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals. Yes. Han Zhenqiu nodded. Other than the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula, which only the sect leader is qualified to cultivate, all of the high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals are stored in the library. The Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula? Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. Do I have the right to view its manual? As one who has comprehended the God's sword intent, you are next in line to succeed the sect leader position, so there's no doubt that you are qualified to learn the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula. However, the way that this cultivation technique is passed down is a little peculiar. It doesn't have a specific cultivation technique manual to it. You'll have to experience it for yourself in order to learn it. Follow me, Han Zhenqiu said as he rose to his feet and walked out of the Elder Council. Zhong Xian quickly followed behind him. Soon, they were standing before a private chamber. Han Zhenqiu took out his sect leader token to release the seal surrounding the chamber before entering. Within the chamber was a row of statues. With a quick count, there were exactly 12 of them. Each of them was holding a sword, and they were displaying a different sword art. Is this the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula? Zhong Xian frowned. Indeed. The cultivation technique is the key to comprehending the God's sword intent, and the secret behind it lies among the statues, Han Zhenqiu replied. Zhong Xian slowly assessed the 12 statues one by one. Each of them was standing in a different pose. There was nothing to indicate the flow of zhenqi, making it hard to believe that a cultivation technique was hidden among the statues. These 12 statues represent a sword maneuver each. These sword maneuvers are extremely bizarre, defying the very physical constitution of a human. However, if you move in accordance with these sword maneuvers, your zhenqi will flow on its own, forming a cultivation technique. This cultivation technique is what we call the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula. It's not only the highest high immortal realm cultivation technique of our sect, it's also the key to reaching the semi-divinity realm, Han Zhenqiu explained. Just as Han Zhenqiu had said, the sword maneuvers were extremely bizarre. All 12 statues were bent at unbelievable angles that defied the very physical constitution of a human, such that they felt like they were some sort of abstract art instead of sword maneuvers. You should start by practicing this first maneuver. The maneuvers will get progressively harder as you continue. Back then, it took me 3 whole days before I finally mastered the first maneuver, Han Zhenqiu said with a bitter smile. 3 whole days? Zhong Xian asked as he looked at the first statue. The maneuver required one to bend his back backward, and the sword would pierce right above one's head. It was an extremely awkward pose to look at, let alone trying to imitate it. Yes, and this is the easiest one. Han Zhenqiu nodded. The second maneuver took me 10 days, the third one took me a year. All in all, I took 15 years to master all 12 maneuvers. Considering that this was the highest cultivation technique left behind by their founder, it was already an amazing feat that he had been able to master it within 15 years. He could be considered one of the more talented sect leaders in the entire history of the sect. On the other hand, Zhong Xian was only astonished by how long the other party had taken. 15 years, that was already 3/4 of his current age. Noticing the bizarre look on Zhong Xian's face, Han Zhenqiu replied with a dignified harumph. You shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of the cultivation technique. In the entire history of our sect, my feat of mastering all 12 maneuvers within 15 years ranks me within the top 10 sect leaders. Only the most talented sword practitioners could become the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. The very rules of the sect had already determined that. If he did not possess superior capabilities, he would not have been the one in this seat. 15 years did sound like a long time to spend on a single cultivation technique, But considering that it was the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula that they were talking about, it was already a formidable feat, is that so? Zhong Xian asked doubtfully as he whipped out the Tongzhang sword. He bent his back backward till it was parallel to his body before directing his sword upward. In an instant, he had already perfectly imitated the pose of the first statue. Han Jianqiu's eyebrows shot up. Just a moment ago, he had said that it had taken him 3 days to master the first move when the other party copied it perfectly right away. This left him with a horrible premonition. He cleared his throat as he awkwardly attempted to salvage his dignity. Well, the first maneuver is the easiest of the 12 maneuvers. As someone who has comprehended the god's sword intent, it's expected of you to grasp it right away. However, the rest won't be as easy as this. Really? Let me give it a try. Zhong Xian's body began bending at an unbelievable angle, and before long, he had already perfectly imitated the second pose as well. After that, he moved on to the third maneuver, the fourth maneuver, the fifth maneuver. By the time Han Jianqiu regained his wits, Zhong Xian was already at the 10th maneuver. Han Jianqiu was frenzied. He wondered if it was because of people like Zhong Xian that good cultivators eventually despaired and resorted to unorthodox arts. He could still argue that Zhong Xian was able to perform the first maneuver instantly because it was the easiest, but the latter continued and performed the other maneuvers without a hitch as well. Could it be possible that the young man had practiced the maneuvers before? But that should have been impossible. Other than the generations of sect leaders, there was no way anyone else could have entered this private chamber. Who? While Han Jianqiu was still trying to make sense out of this irrational situation, the young man went on to perform the 2 remaining maneuvers impeccably. As if he was unable to wrap his head around how anyone could spend so long to master these basic maneuvers, the young man turned to him and asked, "Did you really spend 15 years on this?" What could Han Jianqiu say in a situation like that? It was just a moment ago that he had boasted about how he had only spent 15 years mastering those 12 moves, and he had even gleefully bragged that he was amid the top 10. Yet, the young man in front of him had crushed this achievement of his in just 15 short breaths. He suddenly understood why there were recluses in the world. At this very instant, he felt like holing himself up as well. Just as he was still wondering how he could flee from the current situation before him, the young man's voice suddenly sounded once more. "Speaking of which, if you have practiced this cultivation technique for 15 years, haven't you realized that the sequencing of the maneuvers is actually wrong?" Wrong? Han Jianqiu was stunned. Discord link, https://discord. GG/ATHVEX. Chapter 2003 Fly T. Han Jianqiu was perplexed. The difficulty of the maneuvers increased progressively as one advanced from one maneuver to the next. While he was cultivating the technique himself, he didn't feel awkwardness in the flow of his zhenqi or any discomfort either. More importantly, his cultivation and comprehension of swordsmanship swiftly surged when he cultivated in such a manner too. Given so, how could the sequence be wrong? If you were to swap the first maneuver with the 7th maneuver, the rate which you are able to refine your zhenqi at will be much swifter. If you swap the 8th maneuver with the 11th maneuver, you will be able to enhance the prowess of your sword intent. If you swap the 6th maneuver with the 3rd maneuver, you will be able to sharpen your concentration to unprecedented levels. Zhong Xian said as he casually pointed his finger around. Perplexed, Han Jianqiu quickly cultivated in accordance with the sequencing that Zhong Xian mentioned. Boom! His zhenqi surged forth like a torrential river, swiftly pouring his energy into areas where he was unable to cultivate previously. At the same time, he could feel his conceptualization of swordsmanship deepening significantly with each move, causing his sword intent to be far sharper than before. He felt like he could sever the surrounding space with a simple slash of his sword. "You're right." Han Jianqiu was stunned. It had been 80 years since he started cultivating this technique, but not once had it crossed his mind that the sequencing could have been wrong. What was even more unimaginable to him was that the technique could actually be so much more powerful just by swapping a few of the sequences. His mastery of swordsmanship, which had stagnated for quite some time now, had finally begun to advance once more. The advancement was still very minor at the moment, but with time, it would snowball and gather greater momentum. One day, he might even comprehend the god's sword intent, just like the young man before him. As he slowly recovered from his shock and excitement, he couldn't stop himself from gazing upon Zhongxian with an incredulous look. He had spent 15 years to master the 12 maneuvers, but the other party achieved the same within just 15 breaths. And if that wasn't enough, the other party even managed to discern the flaws in the cultivation technique and listed out some practical steps for further improvement. Whatever the thing standing before him was, there was no doubt that he wasn't human. He was still thinking that luck played a huge part in the young man comprehending the god's sword intent, but given the current evidence laid out before him, the difference between them lay not in their luck but their talents. The young man simply possessed an inconceivably immense talent for swordsmanship. In fact, there was no saying that the young man might even be able to rival the master of the ethereal hall. Several thousand years ago, the master of the ethereal hall appeared out of nowhere. Within several short months, he had already swept across the entire Forsaken continent and become an undefeatable existence. After which, he even barged into the Hall of Gods all alone and snatched the character from it, thus establishing the ethereal hall. Over the past several thousand years, there had been no one who was able to match the accomplishments of the master of the ethereal hall. However, it seemed like that was just about to change. At this rate, by the time the Azure Bridge opens once more and the geniuses of the 6 sects gather, our Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion would surely be able to acquire the best positions. Han Zhenqiu thought as excitement flickered in his eyes. In the past, even though their Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion had acquired half a god, one character in the past, they were still unable to unite the 6 sects together due to their limited prowess. However, with Zhongxian on their side, they would surely be able to convince the remaining 6 sects to follow their lead. He excitedly turned to look at Zhongxian, only to see the latter standing quietly on the spot, as if he had just received an epiphany. Knowing that such epiphanies didn't come easily, Han Zhenqiu quietly left the private chamber. Just as Han Zhenqiu had guessed, Zhongxian had indeed received an epiphany. It was regrettable that the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula wasn't of much use to him in pushing for a breakthrough to High Immortal Realm, but it did allow him to better control his God's sword intent. He had used the golden page he had received from accepting Dan Xiaotian was his direct disciple to seal the God's sword intent that had rushed toward him back them. He had already managed to comprehend the entirety of the God's sword intent thus far, but due to the limitations of his cultivation and soul, he was still unable to bring out the full prowess of it. However, when he practiced the 12 maneuvers he had just learned, he found that the God's sword intent was fusing together with his body. In other words, the God's sword intent had truly become a part of him, and he could execute it as and when he liked. It was no longer limited by the strength of his body anymore. That would explain why Han Zhenqiu has mentioned that this cultivation technique is the key to comprehending the God's sword intent. Feeling the changes in his body, Zhongxian thought. If he could execute the full prowess of the God's sword intent when he faced the black-robed figures back then, he would have been able to defeat the 3 heavenly true immortals even if he hadn't achieved a breakthrough to true immortal. That was just how powerful the complete God's sword intent was. Goo goo goo. As the God's sword intent flowed through his body smoothly, Zhongxian could feel his presence becoming sharper and sharper. It felt like his sword intent could pierce through the heavens at his will. Hu. As sword intent flowed relentlessly through Zhongxian's body, he felt his zhenqi morphing into a sword, and slowly, his body began to rise into the air. This is flight. Zhongxian's eyes gleamed in agitation. Due to the increased spatial pressure in the Azure as compared to the Master-Teacher continent, only those who had reached high immortals were capable of flight. Zhongxian's cultivation was still only at heavenly true immortal at the moment, but through the God's sword intent in his body, he was able to morph his zhenqi into a sword and rise into the air. In terms of speed, he should be able to move even faster than Elder Chouhua. With my current means, I should be able to put up a fight against heavenly high immortals now. Even if I were to be faced with the black-robed heavenly high immortal expert from the Hall of Gods once more, I wouldn't as helpless as I was anymore. Feeling the changes in his body, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. While he lamented the fact that he hadn't been able to find any high immortal realm cultivation technique manuals to compile his Heaven's Path divine art, Nevertheless, these 12 maneuvers granted him a much deeper understanding of the god's sword intent. With this, his fighting prowess was pushed to a much greater height. Given his current fighting prowess, he figured that even Elder Bai Yi wouldn't be a match for him anymore. Pulling his thoughts away from his cultivation, Zhongxian turned to his dantian and asked, "Dongshu God, where are the swords you have swallowed? Did you leave one for me?" He had this fellow devour his opponent's swords during the battle against the assassins from the Hall of Gods back then, and that had relieved him from much pressure back then. Well, it would have been much better if it hadn't devoured Elder Cho Hua's sword too. Due to how urgent things were earlier, he didn't have time to inquire about its condition. Since he had some time on his hand now, it would be good to show some care and concern to the new legendary beast he had just tamed. Upon hearing Zhongxian's question, the Dongshu God immediately backed away warily. "Hold it right there. Didn't you promise that you wouldn't make me spit out those swords? No backses. Of course, do I look like such a dishonorable person to you? I am just worried that you are going to get a tummy ache after stuffing yourself so much," Zhongxian replied with a perfectly calm smile. "Oh, that's nothing at all. I'm already done digesting all those swords." The Dongshu gourd shook its bottom gleefully. "You are already done digesting those swords?" Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. He quickly took a closer look at the Dongshu gourd, and the latter was lazing around his dantian, as per usual. It displayed no signs of discomfort, as if assimilating the tremendous amount of energy from 4 high immortal tier swords was nothing to it at all. Forget it. Knowing that it was impossible for him to take back the swords the Dongshu gourd had digested, Zhongxian sighed deeply as he flicked his wrist and took out the Tongshang sword and several corpses. They were the Heavenly High Immortal and 3 Heavenly True Immortals whom he had defeated earlier. Wang. As soon as the corpses appeared, a sword suddenly rushed right toward Zhongxian's glabella. It was the sword of the black-robed Heavenly High Immortal was using back then. It was too shocked by the sight of a book crushing its master to death that it failed to react even while it was being kept into a storage ring. Upon seeing its enemy once more, it immediately made its move to avenge its master. "Who?" Zhongxian calmly raised his hand and pinched his fingers together. With perfect precision, the sword was pinched right in between his fingers. He might be helpless against a high immortal tier sword back when he was still at pseudo-immortal realm, but now that he had raised his cultivation to heavenly true immortal and completely comprehended the god's sword intent, not even heavenly high immortals would necessarily be a match for him. Naturally, dealing with a mere sword was well within his means. "Why you?" The sword could hardly believe what was happening. It had only been an hour. How did this fellow become so powerful all of a sudden? Zhongxian couldn't be bothered to waste its time with the sword. While grabbing the sword with a hand, he swiftly flicked several points of the sword with his other hand. Su. As sword intent struck several points of the sword spirit could barely release a pitiful wail before dissipating into nothing. Zhongxian could tell that the sword spirit was loyal to the Heavenly High Immortal, such that even if he were to tame it, there was a good chance that it might still betray him. He didn't want to be in a position where he would have to guard against his own sword turning against him while being in the midst of an intense battle with others. In order to avoid trouble, he decided to wipe away the spirit existing within the sword with his god's sword intent. That's no different from crippling that sword. Seeing his actions, the Tongshang sword shuddered in shock. Its strength was at the same level as the other sword, but its master was able to dissipate the spirit of the other sword within moments. Didn't this mean that its master wielded the ability to destroy it too? It could understand why its master would want to destroy the other sword, but a high immortal tier sword without a spirit would have its prowess significantly diminished. It would be nothing but a slightly more resilient weapon. "Don't worry, it isn't crippled for good," Zhongxian chuckled softly and he tapped his finger lightly on the sword. 2 breaths later, a crisp buzz reminiscent of the melodies singing of birds sounded from the sword. It sounded like the celebration of a new life. The sword has gained another spirit. Upon seeing this sight, the Tongshang sword nearly plummeted from the sky. It would have usually taken many years of nurturing for a sword to gain spirit. Yet, the young man was able to destroy a spirit with a flick of his finger and reconstruct a new one with another flick. The Tongs-Hang sword couldn't help but tremble in fear as it recalled what it had done in the past. The reason why it dared to act haughtily was because it knew that the sword would be ruined once it was gone. There was no sword practitioner who would willingly destroy their own sword. But when it saw what Zhong Xian did, it realized that it was actually expendable. The heck, this fellow really couldn't be gauged by normal means. He was actually capable of bestowing spirits upon weapons. In other words, its pride meant nothing at all before the other party. It seemed like it would have to make sure to lie low in the future, or else it wouldn't even know how it died. At this moment, the Tongs-Hang sword had really submitted to Zhong Xian in both body and soul. It dared not to harbor any thoughts of opposing the latter anymore. From now on, I shall call you the sword. Taming the weapon he had just enchanted with ease, Zhong Xian looked at the weapon in his hand contentedly. Just like the Tongs-Hang sword, it was another heavenly high immortal tier weapon. The sword. The newly enchanted sword nearly plummeted from the sky upon hearing that. Wasn't this name a little too flippant? No matter what, it was still a high immortal tier sword, one of the strongest existence on the Forsaken Continent. How could it live with such a frivolous name? Unable to accept this, the sword protested, Master, can I request for another name? I think that the name you have come up with is a little too casual. Casual? This. Zhong Xian frowned a little. Well, shall I call you Little Swordy instead? Putong. The sword collapsed to the ground in despair and began wailing. The heck? If this is going to be it, I might as well have just gone with the first name. Chapter 2004. Heading to the Starchaser Palace. With the death of their masters, the imprints on the storage rings were released. Thus, Zhong Xian only had to drip his blood on them in order to tame them. He quickly browsed through the contents of the storage rings, and soon enough, a bitter smile surfaced on his lips. He thought that he would be able to gather quite a few treasures given how powerful his opponents were, but to his shock, they were appallingly poor. Other than the high immortal tier swords which the Dongshu Gourd had already swallowed, there were only a couple of recovery pills, edible food, clear water, and a few sets of clean clothes. Zhong Xian continued looking through the contents of the storage ring, but there was nothing else that was of value. However, he did find something surprising in them. This is the ethereal token? Did the experts of the Hall of Gods use ethereal tokens too? That notion somehow didn't seem too convincing to him. It was hard to picture the lofty experts of the Hall of Gods utilizing a creation of what they presumed as inferior beings of the Forsaken Continent. Something felt rather bizarre here. A frown furrowed his forehead as he picked up the ethereal token and tapped on it lightly. He slit the tip of his finger and dripped a droplet of blood on the token, intending to tame it and take a look at what was within. However, in the next moment, the ethereal token abruptly crumbled into innumerable pieces. Seeing such a sight, Zhong Xian shook his head and sighed. The ethereal token wasn't like the other artifacts, where it was possible for others to tame it after the original owner died. It was designed in a way such that it would be destroyed if anyone other than the original owner tried to claim possession of it. In other words, he wouldn't be able to view what was within the ethereal token. He tried maneuvering with the other 3 ethereal tokens, but they ended up disintegrating too. Left with no choice, Zhong Xian could only give up on it. It seems that Kong Shi's invention has been acknowledged by even the Hall of Gods. Zhong Xian murmured. He looked at the 4 corpses before him once more and smiled to himself. Even though there's nothing valuable amongst their possessions, at the very least, their very bodies are already treasures. These bodies could be forged into soulless metal humanoids, and that was already an invaluable treasure to him. Time to get to work then. Sitting on the floor, Zhong Xian drew his soul out of his glabella and began working on the corpses before him. In the faraway sky of the azure, Jia, a door shrouded in shadows creaked open, and a black-robed figure rushed in anxiously. He walked right into the center of the dark hall. The area was illuminated by flickering candlelight, and the imposing back of a figure could be vaguely seen at the center of the room. Master, the black-robed figure kneeled onto the floor and greeted subserviently. How did it go? The imposing figure asked without moving in the least. It's a failure. The 4 of them have been wiped out, the black-robed figure replied with a trembling body. He dared not believe that it was possible for something to be true when he first received the news. He had to check several times before he could even process the information in his head. That was a heavenly high immortal and 3 heavenly true immortals from the Hall of Gods. To think that they could be killed by a mere pseudo-immortal. Such a thing was completely inconceivable to him. They are dead, the imposing figure remarked with a contemplative voice. There wasn't the slightest surprise to be heard in his voice at all. He nodded his head slightly as if he had expected such an outcome, and he said, as expected of a person chosen by the heavens. He is indeed blessed with great luck, just like that man. However, the more that's the case, the more he moves my heart. The black-robed figure kept his head lowered in fright as he listened to his master's mutterings. He dared not to interject for fear of incurring his master's wrath. Where is he at the moment? Master, he seems to have returned to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, the black-robed figure reported. Since he is back at the Sword Pavilion, there's no need to make a move on him for the time being, the imposing figure instructed. Yes, Master. The black-robed figure replied subserviently. If he chooses to never leave the Sword Pavilion, what should we do then? He will have to come out soon, the imposing figure replied confidently. Understood, Master. I'll keep a lookout on him and make a move as soon as he leaves the premises, the black-robed figure replied. Dispatch more capable personnel the next time around. Same as before, I need him alive. It doesn't matter whether he's injured or not, but I want a breathing man presented before me, the imposing figure instructed. Yes, Master, the black-robed figure replied with a deep bow before backing out of the room. At the same time, the silhouette of the imposing figure gradually grew dimmer and dimmer before fading amidst the darkness of the room. There was no way Zhongxian could have been aware of the happenings over at the Hall of Gods. At this very moment, he was pinching his glabella in distress as he rose back up to his feet. The corpses of the 3 true immortal corpses are still within my means to refine, but I'm still a little too lacking to deal with the high immortal corpse. It took only a few moments for him to refine the corpses of the 3 heavenly true immortal experts into soulless metal humanoids, but when it came to the heavenly high immortal expert, no matter what he tried, it didn't seem to work at all. My soul is still a little too weak at the moment. Zhongxian shook his head sourly. He had managed to find cultivation technique manuals to advance his Zhenqi cultivation all the way to heavenly true immortal realm, but he wasn't so fortunate when it came to his soul cultivation. At the very moment, his soul cultivation was still only at heavenly pseudo-immortal realm. Without the corresponding Heaven's Path soul art, he was unable to make a breakthrough. As the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion focused mainly on sword art and sword intent, there wasn't any particularly high requirement on one's soul energy. As such, there weren't too many books regarding soul cultivation. Due to that, he was still a long way off from compiling his true immortal realm Heaven's Path soul art. I should try to find ways to further my soul cultivation. Zhongxian thought as he kept the corpse of the heavenly high immortal back to his storage ring. This wasn't just so that he could refine the corpse of the heavenly high immortal. It was a requirement for him to achieve a breakthrough to high immortal as well. Even though he hadn't managed to gather enough cultivation technique manuals to compile the high immortal realm Heaven's Path divine art yet, through the books he had gathered thus far, he was still able to gain some understanding regarding the cultivation realm. Similar to his breakthrough to ancient sage back then, his soul, physical body, and Zhenqi must be in perfect harmony in order for him to successfully reach high immortal realm. Such a problem didn't exist for others as they had never cultivated their soul in the first place, as their Zhenqi cultivation would have taken a far more dominant position. As such, it was much easier for them to harmonize their souls together with their Zhenqi cultivation. On the other hand, Zhongxian would need to establish an equilibrium between his soul cultivation and Zhenqi cultivation in order to achieve a breakthrough, and that could only be done by raising his soul cultivation up to par as well. Thus, the most urgent matter at hand for him was to find soul cultivation techniques. With such thoughts in mind, he walked out of the private chamber. Since he had already mastered the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula and fully grasped the God's sword intent, there wasn't much reason for him to remain here anymore. Han Jianqiu was standing outside of the private chamber when Zhongxian came out, and he hurriedly asked with a smile, "How is it?" "It's still all right." Sect leader Han, may I know which of the 6 sects specialize in soul arts? Zhong Xian pondered for a moment before asking. He had already browsed through all of the books in the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, and honestly, he bore no hopes that he could gather sufficient true immortal realm soul cultivation techniques here. As most cultivators on the Forsaken Continent still focused on Junchi cultivation, unless he were to find a sect that specialized in soul art, otherwise it would really be terribly difficult for him to find the necessary books to advance his soul cultivation. Not quite comprehending the rationale behind Zhong Xian's question, Han Jianqiu replied contemplatively, "If I have to name the power among the 6 sects that is the most skilled in soul arts, it would definitely be no other than the Starchaser Palace. They are capable of communicating with the gods, and they are even able to make use of tributes to allow gods to descend upon lower dimensions. I can't think of any other power that is more skilled in the field of soul arts other than them." Starchaser Palace? Zhong Xian nodded quietly. He had heard the name of this sect far too many times in the past. Each of the 6 sects has its own field of specialty. Unlike the rest of us, the members of the Starchaser Palace aren't exiles of the god tribe but the indigenous population of this land. They are blessed with powerful souls at birth, so their field of specialty naturally gravitated towards soul arts. For our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, as you can see, we are more skilled in the field of sword, but in contrast, we are much lacking in the development of our souls. The Myriad Beast Hall, just as its name suggests, is proficient in the art of taming beasts. Every single one of their core disciples has at least a powerful beast as their companion, so their fighting prowess really isn't to be underestimated. The 7-star Pavilion is the #1 business on the Forsaken Continent. It acquires and sells all kinds of artifacts through its vast channels that spread across the entire continent. In terms of fighting prowess, it's definitely unable to match up to the other 5 sects, but its vast wealth is more than enough to prop it within the ranks of the 6 sects. The Black Mirror Citadel specializes in the forging of weaponry and artifacts. Your Tongshang sword is one of their masterpieces. Last but not least is the Evanescent Immortal sect. They reside in the northernmost sea, and their disciples are incredibly skilled in movement techniques. Han Jianqiu quickly explained the backgrounds of the 6 sects in the Azure. "I see." Zhong Xian nodded in realization. He had heard about the 6 sects quite a few times, and they were frequently mentioned in books as well. However, it was much more insightful to have someone who was knowledgeable about the Azure explaining it to him directly. "You mentioned that the members of the Starchaser Palace are from the indigenous population of this land and not exiles of the god tribe. May I know what that means?" Zhong Xian asked. Most of the matters that he had gotten himself involved with recently somehow ended up being related to the Starchaser Palace in one way or another, and that had made him deeply interested in this power. As you might know, most of those living on the Forsaken Continent are people who have been exiled from the god tribe. However, this piece of land wasn't barren prior to our arrival. Those people who have been living here even before us are known as the indigenous population. The Starchaser Palace is a power formed by the indigenous population, and the source of their strength originates from their superior souls that allow them to communicate with even the gods, Han Jianqiu explained. Zhong Xian nodded in realization. "Are you intending to learn soul arts?" Han Jianqiu asked. "That's indeed what I have in mind at the moment," Zhong Xian nodded. "I would like to make a trip over to the Starchaser Palace to take a look." Han Jianqiu frowned. It's a vast distance between the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and the Starchaser Palace. Even if you were to ride on an immortal beast, it would take you 10 days at the very least to arrive there. Considering that you have already caught the eye of the Hall of Gods, and judging from how hostile the Starchaser Palace is toward outsiders, I don't advise you to make this journey. Zhong Xian nodded with a deep sigh. He had also thought of these factors as well. Considering that it was an organization made solely out of the indigenous population, it wasn't too hard to deduce that they weren't too friendly toward the exiles who had claimed possession of their lands too. It would be hard for him to convince them to allow him to access their repository of soul cultivation technique manuals. Furthermore, it was very likely that the Hall of Gods was keeping a lookout on his movements, so leaving the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion at this juncture was an extremely dangerous move. However, if he didn't make this trip, he would never be able to advance his soul cultivation and eventually achieve a breakthrough to high immortal realm. It was a risky move, but he viewed it to be necessary as well. Wasting any time would just be giving the Hall of Gods more time to prepare itself, thus placing him in a worse position. Besides, the Godblood rock he had seen back at the Wuhai market could very well be related to Luo Ruoxin. No matter what, he had to make a trip over to the Starchaser Palace to investigate the matter too. As for the dangers, he was indeed a bit apprehensive at the notion of having to face the experts of the Hall of Gods. Without a doubt, he wasn't a match for them at the moment. However, as long as he disguised himself well and made sure not to expose his god sword intent, it shouldn't be too easy for the Hall of Gods to find him either. If you insist on heading to the Starchaser Palace, allow me to go with you then. While Du Qingyuan isn't an easy person to deal with, I think I should at least be able to convince her to give you leeway to study their soul arts. Han Jianqiu proposed. With his semi-divinity realm cultivation and superior swordsmanship, even if he was unable to subdue the experts of the Hall of Gods, he should still at least be able to buy some time for Zhongxian to escape in dire situations. However, Zhongxian shook his head and said, "It's fine, I'll head there alone." If Han Jianqiu were to follow him, the chances that they would be exposed would be much higher. He felt that he would be in a much safer position sneaking over discreetly. More importantly, he was intending to look into the matter concerning the Godblood rock and Luo Ruoxin. At least for the time being, he didn't want too many people to know about it. Chapter 2005 All Hail Zhongxian, It's Too Dangerous. Han Jianqiu exclaimed anxiously. In response to Han Jianqiu's worry, Zhongxian replied, "I am someone who has comprehended the god's sword intent. Just like you have mentioned many times before, it's only a matter of time before I become the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. How can I mature if I were to constantly remain under your protection? A sword practitioner should have the tenacity of a raging bull, charging down adversities without any hesitation. Fear would only fill my swordsmanship with hesitation." But even so, Han Jianqiu wanted to protest, but he knew that there was some sense in what Zhongxian was saying. It was often in times of danger that cultivators matured and rose to greater heights. Without facing adversities and putting one's swordsmanship to the test, it was impossible for one to reach the peak. It was not to say that being careful wasn't important, but things that had to be done must be accomplished with gusto and spirit. Once a sword practitioner lost his decisiveness, his swordsmanship would only become dull and conventional. There were such cases in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion too. 1,000 years ago, there was a sect leader whose swordsmanship had reached an unsurpassable level, such that he had no rivals in the world. However, a small incident caused him to accidentally harm his closest friend, and under great self-reproach, he ended up doubting his own path. This seed of doubt swiftly grew, wavering his faith in the sword. Eventually, his very sword intent collapsed, resulting in the swift regression of his cultivation. Eventually, he died a humble man. There were bound to be many regrets and difficulties in life, but learning how to overcome them was the way how one could mature and grow. If someone who had comprehended the god's sword intent were to falter in the face of danger, he would never become a great person. Protecting someone didn't mean sheltering him from all dangers in the world. It was to provide him with the necessary conditions required for him to mature and eventually become independent in the world I understand. "I'll lend you the swiftest aerial immortal beast in our sect then." Han Jianqiu was still deeply apprehensive, but he knew that this was something he would just have to learn how to cope with. "There's no need for that. That would be too eye-catching," Zhongxian replied. He contemplated for a brief moment before asking, "Are these any aerial immortal beasts residing around the area? I think I'll try to tame one myself." He didn't know where the experts of the Hall of Gods were hiding, but riding an aerial immortal beast of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion would simply be too eye-catching. That would be no different from declaring to all of them that he was leaving the safe grounds of the sect. Since that was the case, he might as well discreetly leave and tame an aerial immortal beast while he was at it. That shouldn't hinder his journey by too much. "You wish to tame an aerial immortal beast yourself?" Han Jianqiu was stunned. Immortal beasts are known to be extremely arrogant, and taming them often takes a very long time. It isn't as easy as you think it out to be. The aerial immortal beasts that the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion were rearing were all bought over from the Myriad Beasts Hall. Their members were completely focused on furthering their swordsmanship that practically none of them knew anything about beast taming at all. Nevertheless, they were still aware of the difficulties in attempting to tame the immortal beasts. Even the disciples of the Myriad Beasts Hall, who devoted their lives to learning to master their craft of beast taming, would take an incredibly long time in order to tame even a single immortal beast. I understand. I'm just intending on giving it a try, Zhongxian replied with a smile. I see that you have already made your mind. Since that's the case, I won't stop you either. This is a protective jade token I have forged. In times of danger, you can infuse your zhenqi into it, and it'll form a defensive light barrier around you. It will protect you from a single decisive strike by a semi-divinity realm expert. Seeing that Zhongxian's mind was made up, Han Jianqiu shook his head helplessly before passing a jade token over. Thank you, Zhongxian replied as he accepted the protective jade token. Regarding the aerial immortal beast you mentioned earlier, on the Ascendant Cloud Mountain roughly 10,000 li away from here, there are several high immortal and true immortal realm beasts. The Myriad Beasts Hall has sent their members over to tame them several times, but none of them have succeeded to date. You have to take caution if you really wish to head there, Han Jianqiu advised. Zhongxian nodded in response. He moved on to clarify the location of the Starchaser Palace and inquire a few more questions, and once he received all the answers he needed, he quickly headed over to Dan Xiaotian's residence. By this moment, Bai Wanqing had already received a message from Elder Bai Yi and returned back from Wuhai City. Xiaotian, I have taken Wanqing in as my direct disciple. From this day onward, she'll be your senior. Paying respects to senior, Dan Xiaotian clasped his wrist and greeted Bai Wanqing. These are the cultivation techniques and sword arts you will be practicing in the future. Feel free to pose any doubts you have, Zhongxian said as he passed 2 jade tokens over to them with a flick of his wrist. Embedded within the jade tokens were the cultivation techniques and some pointers regarding the direction they should focus on in the future. Dan Xiaotian and Bai Wanqing quickly immersed their consciousness into the jade token to take a look, and soon, they found themselves completely engrossed with what they were reading. The cultivation technique and sword art recorded within the jade token truly an ingenious work. As long as they practiced it seriously, they would surely be able to advance their cultivation swiftly. It didn't take them long to finish going through everything in the jade token, and they began posing the uncertainties they harbored in their minds. Zhongxian answered their doubts one after another patiently. After which, he swiftly entered the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's ethereal hall and purchased 2 bottles of standard immortal pills and superior immortal pills. Passing one of each to his 2 direct disciples, he said, "These are the immortal pills that the 2 of you will require for your cultivation. I hope that you'll be able to meet my expectations the next time we meet." By the time he finished arranging future plans for his direct disciples, dawn was already around the corner. Before he knew it, he had already spent 2 days in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. That was quite a long period of time. Fortunately, the time he had spent here had been quite fruitful as well. He managed to advance his cultivation to heavenly true immortal realm, and he had comprehended the god's sword intent as well. At the same time, he tamed 2 high immortal tier weapons and refined 3 heavenly true immortal realm soulless metal humanoids. All in all, he had become much more powerful than before, and he was no longer completely helpless even against the top echelons of the Forsaken Continent anymore. Will not let down teachers' expectations. Bai Wanqing and Dan Xiaotian kowtowed deeply with reddened eyes. Watching this sight, Zhongxian nodded his head in satisfaction. His journey in the Azure was destined to be a short one, especially since his primary goal was to find Luo Ruoxin. It was not a part of his plan to take in any direct disciple at all, but he didn't regret his decision. Dan Xiaotian and Bai Wanqing had fine youths with resilient characters, and he was very satisfied with them. It was just a pity that he couldn't bring them around like Zhao Ya and the others and teach them carefully. They could only rely on themselves in the future. Cao Chengli, I want you to take care of Xiaotian and Wanqing after I leave. These are your cultivation techniques and pills. Stop lusting over women all the time and focus more on your concentration. Instead of hearing you talk about your sexual exploits and how you have conquered 100 flowers or something, I hope to see substantial improvements in your cultivation the next time we meet. Is that understood? Zhong Xian called the bandit Cao Chengli over and lectured him. Cough cough. Young master, I have actually conquered my 1000th flower already, Cao Chengli replied with an awkward scratch of his head. Then, he peeked at Zhong Xian curiously and asked meekly, just out of sheer curiosity, young master, but how many flowers have you conquered at the moment? Those words immediately turned Zhong Xian's face utterly black. This fellow sure was getting ahead of himself. I heard that you have been hopping across the doorsill recently. Just look at what is becoming of your manners. If I were to ever find out that you have been conducting yourself in such a ridiculous manner, you can be certain that I'll break your darned leg. I can't hop across the doorsill either. Cao Chengli was appalled. The left leg was a no-go, and the right leg was a no-go too. And now, he couldn't even hop across either. Was the young master thinking of keeping him out of the residence or confining him inside the residence for life? Leaving Cao Chengli to reflect on his own wrongdoings, Zhong Xian harumphed coldly once more before leaving the residence. By the time the sun started rising by the horizon, he had already left the mountain gate, disappearing completely amidst the vast wilderness. A moment after he disappeared, two elders suddenly appeared in midair. They looked at one another with utterly confused looks on their faces. They were no other than Elder He Tian and Elder Chou Hua. Han Jianqiu did permit Zhong Xian to leave on his own, but eventually, he found himself unable to leave the latter to be. It was the safety of their future sect leader they were talking about here. Nothing must go wrong. Thus, as soon as Zhong Xian left, he immediately arranged for the two elders to follow Zhong Xian closely and protect him from the shadows. Who could have thought that they would lose Zhong Xian as soon as they left the sect? Quick, we have to find him. The two of them combed the area frantically in search of the young man, but the entire area was completely empty. There was no sight of Zhong Xian to be seen at all. 4 hours later, the two of them had no choice but to return to the Elder Council awkwardly to report on their failure. To think that two heavenly high immortals like them would lose sight of a heavenly true immortal. They had no idea how they could face the sect leader like that. You lost him? Han Jianqiu seemed to have guessed what had happened upon seeing their figures, thus sparing them from the agony of having to explain their own failure. This. Elder He Tian and Elder Chou Hua dared not to raise their heads. He knew that I would send the two of you to follow him, so he made countermeasures in advance. Han Jianqiu sighed helplessly. He knew that we were following him. The two elders raised their heads simultaneously. This is the message he has left for the two of you, Han Jianqiu said as he flicked 2 jade tokens into the hands of the two elders. The two elders quickly infused their zhenqi into the jade token, and soon, Zhong Xian's voice sounded in the air, Elder He and Elder Chou, there's no need for you two to follow me. I'm capable of protecting myself. This is a sword art I have created for the two of you after analyzing the flaws in your swordsmanship. As long as you cultivate according to it, you should be able to bring your mastery of swordsmanship to greater heights. This. They quickly peered into the contents of the jade token, and in the next moment, the two of them were shocked speechless. The sword art in the jade token happened to resolve all of the flaws in their swordsmanship. As long as they practiced this technique diligently, they would be able to reach a higher level in their mastery. In fact, it might even prop their cultivation to higher grounds even. How did you see through this? The two of them widened their eyes in disbelief. It was only common sense for a sword practitioner to keep the flaws of his swordsmanship to himself. Such a thing was not something one could reveal even to one's closest kin. Yet, all it took was a single duel for the young man to uncover the entirety of their flaws and figure out a feasible method to correct them. They had known all this while that the sword practitioner who had comprehended the god's sword intent was bound to be exceptional, but this was way beyond their imagination. One must know that every single move in a swordsmanship was like a gear in a complete system. Even if one were to become aware of a problem in this single gear, altering it haphazardly could cause even more trouble in the entire system instead. It was for this reason that they dared not to correct their flaws despite being aware of the problems they posed. It was not that they didn't want to do so but that they were unable to do so. Yet, such a feat was achieved impeccably by the young man. How can we ever hope to repay this favor? The eyes of the two elders reddened in agitation. They were intending on protecting the young man, but not only did the young man not need their help, he even gifted them with such a huge present. Words could hardly describe their current feelings. It isn't just the both of you. Every single one of us received something similar too. Han Zhenqiu said as he looked out of the elder council with a deep look in his eyes. It felt as if the young man was a deity who had descended upon them, bestowing them with his blessings before vanishing without a trace. Elder He Tian and Elder Cho Hua looked around the room, and it was only then did they realize that the sect leader and the other elders had a jade token in their hands as well. Most likely, these jade tokens contained their flaws and the ways to resolve the issue. Cultivate well. Don't let down his expectations of you, Han Zhenqiu said as he stood up. Given Zhongxian's capabilities, I believe that the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion would only soar to greater heights under his leadership. Indeed. The others in the room nodded their heads in agitation. It turned out that the appearance of a practitioner who had comprehended the god's sword intent wasn't just a blessing to the sect but its individual members as well. As long as they could internalize Zhongxian's teachings, they could pass the knowledge down to the disciples as well, and the fighting prowess of the sect would soar swiftly. Just thinking about the matter left every one of them trembling in excitement. A talented genius could ensure a sect's prosperity for a generation, but a talented teacher could ensure the prosperity of the sect for generations to come. I have made up my mind, Han Zhenqiu suddenly declared with conviction. As if knowing what was on Han Zhenqiu's mind, Elder He Tian asked in astonishment, "Sect leader Han, are you certain?" "Absolutely so," Han Zhenqiu replied. "I was still worried about his boastful temperament, so I thought that there's a need to temper his character a little more before entrusting the sect to him. However, the fact that he's willing to impart his teaching unreservedly to us shows that his mind is already in the right place. I believe that he's ready." After saying those words, Han Zhenqiu took out the token which represented his identity as the sect leader and held it in front of him. His deep voice echoed loudly across the entire Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. "From this day forth, Zhongxian shall be the new sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion." Chapter 2006 Her? Who is Zhongxian? In the core disciple sector of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. A young man was charging forward furiously with a sword in his hand when he suddenly released his grip, causing his sword to fly forth with astonishing swiftness. It pierced right into the bark of an old tree a far distance away. "Senior He, are you practicing her techniques?" a young man asked excitedly as he made his way over. If Bai Ruanqing was here, she would have recognized the two people standing here. They were no other than He Jingxian, the first ranker of the core disciples, and Hu Chen, the fourth ranker. After the battle with Bai Ruanqing, He Jingxian had been studying the two moves that he had lost to, and it was only till now that he finally made some progress. "I must say that these two moves are true works of ingenuity. I am completely awed by just how beautiful and elegant such a simple move could actually be." He Jingxian sighed in amazement. When he first encountered it, he thought that it was nothing more than a simple sword toss. But the more he tried to study it, the more fearsome he realized it was. It was as if that single sword toss harnessed the secrets hidden in the crux of swordsmanship. He simulated many different scenarios in his head, but no matter what he did, he wasn't able to overcome that sword toss at all. It was as if that single sword toss had collapsed every single possibility that lay ahead of him, sealing his fate to certain doom. "If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have all lost to her," Hu Chen replied gloomily. Given the current circumstances, there was no way they couldn't acknowledge Bai Ruanqing's strength. But this only served to deepen their indignation. After all, it felt like Bai Ruanqing had nothing other than those two moves at all. "Did you manage to find out who she learned those two moves from?" He Jingxian asked. "I have narrowed down the possibilities, and my guess is that she has learned them from I am low profile, the person who has conquered the inner disciple sector not too long ago. Hu Chen replied. It's him. He Jingxian frowned. If I'm not mistaken, isn't his cultivation only at dimension Shatterer realm consummation? He should have achieved a breakthrough to lesser pseudo-immortal realm not too long ago. In fact, based on what I have gathered thus far, it seems like I am very handsome who has defeated all of us back then is very likely to be him. Hu Chen replied. He was just about to move on to explain the rationale behind his deduction when a deafening voice echoed across the entire mountain range. From this day forth, Zhongxian shall be the new sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. That's the voice of our sect leader. But what is it that is saying? Zhongxian will be our new sect leader? Who the hell is Zhongxian? He Jingxian and Hu Chen were stunned. It was not uncommon for an incumbent sect leader to step down and pass his position on to someone else. However, most of the time, the person to inherit the position would be an esteemed elder or someone deeply respected within the sect. But Zhongxian? Where did this fellow even come from? Just as the two of them were wondering what was going on, Han Jianqiu's voice continued sounding on. I know that the name Zhongxian is probably unfamiliar to most of you. He is both I am low profile and I am very handsome, the person who has single-handedly defeated the inner disciple sector and core disciple sector within a single day. I am low profile? He Jingxian was stunned. Didn't he just achieve a breakthrough to pseudo-immortal realm not too long ago? It was unthinkable for a lesser pseudo-immortal realm to become the leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. One must know that the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was one of the 6 sects, and it wielded more than enough power to sway the fate of the Forsaken Continent. This was ridiculous. Zhongxian has comprehended the God's sword intent. Even though his cultivation has only reached Heavenly True Immortal, with his superior might in swordsmanship, he has managed to slay a Heavenly High Immortal and 3 Heavenly True Immortals in succession. In the same cultivation realm, he possesses the strength to subdue the combined prowess of me and 4 other elders. Han Jianqiu carried on to justify the rationale behind his decision. Wait a moment, he's at Heavenly True Immortal realm? Did I just hear that he has slain a Heavenly High Immortal? He actually managed to defeat sect leader Han and 4 other elders? He Jingxian and Hu Chen stared at one another with widened eyes. That fellow was actually that powerful. Were they really the same person? Considering how that fellow was only at Dimension Shatterer realm consummation a day ago, it was already an incredible feat that he was able to reach lesser pseudo-immortal realm within the span of a single day. So, what in the freaking world did sect leader Han mean by his cultivation has only reached Heavenly True Immortal? Furthermore, slaying a Heavenly High Immortal? How in the world was that even possible? The reason why I am saying all of this is to tell you all that it's out of my own volition that I chose to pass the role down to him. I hope that you'll support him as your sect leader and push our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion to greater heights. After which, the voice gradually faded away. Hu Chen looked at He Jingxian in disbelief. I guess we should listen to sect leader Han's orders. From this day onward, our sect leader will be none other than Zhongxian, but we don't even know what sect leader Zhong looks like, or even how old he is. He Jingxian and Hu Chen were deeply perplexed as to what they should make of the situation before them. Even if you want us to follow this new sect leader, you should at least tell us what he looks like. You aren't even providing us any information about him at all, so what do you expect to do? In the inner disciple sector, Cao Chengli was currently seated before the entrance of the residence, studying the doorsill intensely. I can't use my left leg, I can't use my right leg, and I can't hop either. It seems like I can only crawl in and out then. Cao Chengli shook his head helplessly. At the moment, however, Han Jianqiu's voice sounded in the air. Our young master has become the leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, one of the 6 sects. Cao Chengli toppled backward in shock. He shook his head vehemently, as if trying to accept the information he had just received. He knew from the very start, back when they were still at Zhenjiang City, that the young master was a formidable person, but he would have never thought that the young master would actually be this amazing of a figure. It was just 2 days since they had arrived at the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but he had already risen from the follower of an inner disciple to the leader of the entire sect. How in the world did he even climb through the ranks so quickly? The cultivating by Wanqing and Dan Xiaotian were taken aback by what they had just heard as well. Slowly, their eyes began blazing with fiery passion. Their teacher had become the leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. As his direct disciples, they couldn't afford to sully his reputation. Thus, they had to work harder than ever. The same sight was happening across the entire Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. In this very moment, every single disciple and elder etched a single name to their mind. Zhong Xian. This young man had appeared from nowhere, but within a short span of 2 days, he advanced from an insignificant figure whom no one knew about to become the esteemed leader of the sect. There was probably no one in the world who had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder as quickly as he did. Elder Han, is it really wise to make such an announcement? Such a conspicuous move would only make the Hall of Gods more wary of sect leader Zhong. Elder He Tian asked with a frown. Since Han Zhenqiu had stepped down as the sect leader, he was automatically demoted to the position of a core elder. They had been trying their best to conceal Zhong Xian's identity, all this while so as to protect him from the Hall of Gods, but Han Zhenqiu actually announced the matter publicly all of a sudden. Was it really fine to do this? Elder He, the Hall of Gods has already made their move. It's too late for us to be trying to hide anything anymore. Since that's the case, we might as well announce the matter and make it public. This way, even if the Hall of Gods wishes to make a move, they would have to consider whether it's really to their benefit to assassinate the new leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and risk drawing the wrath of the Forsaken Continent on them. Han Zhenqiu said. If Zhong Xian was a nobody, the Hall of Gods could have done anything they liked with him, and no one would have given a damn. After all, the world didn't have that much spare time to be overly concerned with someone who had no relevance to them. However, it was different now that Zhong Xian had become the head of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. If the Hall of Gods wanted to kill him, they better be prepared to offer an acceptable explanation to the entire Forsaken Continent. Otherwise, the assassination of the leader of a top power would surely cause widespread panic. If the Hall of Gods was willing to go this far with the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, it could very well do the same to the other 5 sects too. While the 6 sects were rivaling powers to one another, they knew the importance of huddling together before a stronger enemy. And a tight collaboration among the 6 sects was definitely one of the situations which the Hall of Gods would have wanted to avoid. Hearing that explanation, Elder He widened his eyes in realization. The Starchaser Palace. Beyond a door reminiscent of a full moon stood a lady. She was dressed in a white robe which contrasted beautifully against her cascading black hair, almost as if ink imprinted on a piece of paper. She often spent her days gazing into the sky with a deep look in her eyes, as if she was trying to fathom the will of the world. It was no exception today either. Sect leader. A maiden suddenly rushed through the full moon door and kneeled on the ground before the white-robed lady. What's wrong? The white-robed lady turned around, revealing her moving beauty. We have just received news from our informants in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Sect leader Han Zhenqiu has stepped down from his position, the maiden reported. The 6 sects have their own information network. Through the ethereal hall, news could be delivered to all corners of the Forsaken Continent with unprecedented swiftness. Stepped down? What is that man thinking? The white-robed lady frowned. The reason why Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was able to rank within the top 3 of the 6 sects was tightly related to Han Zhenqiu's overwhelming might. If such a powerful expert were to step down all of a sudden without a legitimate reason, it could cause the morale of the entire sect to plummet, and even a pandemonium wasn't completely out of question. I'm not too sure. Based on the news we have received, the announcement came completely out of the blue, and there was no indication beforehand, the maiden replied. I guess the successor must be the person who has comprehended the god's sword intent then. When is the inauguration happening? The white-robed lady asked. The only reason why Han Zhenqiu would have made such a move was because he had found someone more suitable than himself for that position. And the only person who could have been more qualified than Han Zhenqiu was no other than the expert who had comprehended the god's sword intent. That's indeed the case. Sect leader Han Gensho has mentioned that the new sect leader has comprehended the god's sword intent, and his name is. The maiden pondered to jot her memory before replying. Zhong Xian. Zhong Xian. The white-robed lady widened her eyes. Catcher. Catcher. The stone pavement she was standing on began cracking. The intense fluctuation in her emotions caused her to be unable to control the energy in her body for a moment. Sect leader. Shocked, the maiden quickly lowered her head fearfully. It's nothing. I just never thought that he would be so fast. The white-robed lady quickly recovered from her abnormal condition, and the destruction of the stone pavement beneath her also halted as well. Have our informants met the new sect leader yet? Do we have any information on how powerful he is? The new sect leader has yet to appear in public view yet, but based on what sect leader Han Gensho has said thus far, this person's cultivation is only at heavenly true immortal realm at the moment. Nevertheless, he managed to slay a heavenly high immortal and 3 heavenly true immortals, the maiden replied. The informants that were undercover in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had relayed sect leader Han Gensho's words in detail. Despite only being at heavenly true immortal realm himself, he managed to slay a heavenly high immortal, the white-robed lady remarked with an incredulous expression on her face. How long has it been since then? He grew so quickly within such a short span of time. Catcher. Catcher. The stone pavement began to crack once more. Sect leader Du. Are you acquainted with sect leader Zhong Xian? The maiden asked. In her impression, their sect leader was someone who could remain calm even if the sky fell, but on this very day, she had already lost her cool twice. The white-robed lady shook her head and quickly recovered from her daze. With a smile on her lips, she replied, I wouldn't say that we are acquainted, but I know someone who is. Call Wu Chen over. Yes. The maiden backed out of the room, and a few moments later, she returned with an adolescent youth beside her. Paying respects to sect leader Du, the adolescent youth bowed deeply. With her hands behind her back, the white-robed lady looked at him and remarked impassively, His here. Those were 2 short words, but the adolescent youth seemed to immediately understand what the white-robed lady was driving at. His eyes immediately lit up, and he clasped his fist. Sect leader Du, I wish to pursue him. I'm willing to brave through flames and die for his sake. I beseech you to fulfill my wish. You wish to pursue him? Do you know where he is at the moment and how powerful he is? The white-robed lady asked. The adolescent boy shook his head. He's currently the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. He has comprehended the god's sword intent, and his cultivation has reached heavenly true immortal as well. Furthermore, he has even managed to slay a heavenly high immortal as well, the white-robed lady said. This. The adolescent youth was shocked. With an unbelievable look on his face, he exclaimed, he was able to grow indeed. All along, I thought that the spirit god has made a wrong judgment this time around. Just how can a person from a lower dimension possibly be qualified to win her fancy? However, it has become clear that he's indeed someone who possesses extraordinary capabilities and talents. He wouldn't pale in comparison even against Kong Shabak. As the white-robed lady spoke, she walked through the full moon doors and said, Let's head to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion together. I'd like to verify if the newly appointed sect leader is truly him or not. After saying these words, she suddenly vanished on the spot together with the adolescent youth. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,